The sky above Abbott Colony split open like an angry wound, ionized particles sizzling as 5 drop pods screamed through the atmosphere. Inside the lead pod, Captain Jordan Caldwell braced against the G-forces, his quantum spurs humming in anticipation against the reinforced flooring. The neural interface in his Stetson fed him tactical data on the battlefield below. Colonial security forces pinned down on 3 sides by advancing waves of Endurance Elect-directive combat frame. Beacon locked. Trajectory confirmed. Impact in 30 seconds, announced the pod's AI in its affected drawl. Programmed specifically to sound like it had been raised on a ranch outside New Austin. "Much obliged, Hank," Caldwell replied, checking the charge on his plasma-edged Bowie knife. The blade crackled with barely contained energy, casting blue shadows across his weathered face. "Boys, check in." "Lieutenant Powers, green across the board," came the calm voice of his XO. "Sergeant Wilson, weapons hot and ready to dance," reported their heavy weapons specialist. "Corporal Harrington, shields at full capacity," reported their defensive systems expert. "Private Hawkins, stealth systems engaged," finished their infiltration specialist. Caldwell nodded, satisfied. His team wasn't the largest in the Texas Knights, but what they lacked in numbers they made up for in grit and firepower. "Remember," Caldwell said as the pods entered final descent, "these Endurance Elect frames adapt quick. Don't get predictable, and for heaven's sake try not to bunch up this time." "That was one time on New El Paso," Wilson began. "And I've still got the scars," Caldwell cut him off. "Impact in 5, 4, the rest of the countdown was lost in the bone-jarring crash as 5 quantum-enhanced drop pods slammed into the dusty plains of Abbott, creating a perfect pentagon formation around a particularly hard-pressed unit of colonial defenders. Before the dust could settle, the pod's outer shells blew outward in precisely calculated patterns, taking out the nearest combat frames in explosions of superheated shrapnel. Caldwell emerged from his pod in a fluid motion, quantum spurs flaring blue as his boots hit the ground. His Magnum heavy repeater was already in his hands, the ancient design modified with quantum accelerators that made each bullet into a miniature singularity. The weapon had been in his family for 6 generations, each Caldwell adding their own modifications to the venerable firearm. "Texas Knights!" he bellowed, his voice carrying across the battlefield through helmet comms and external speakers alike. "Let's introduce ourselves." The Knights exploded from their pods in perfect synchronization, quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire that confused the machine's targeting systems. Lieutenant Powers immediately dropped to one knee, unfolding his Thunderbird plasma cannon, a weapon that looked like someone had crossed an old-fashioned lever-action rifle with a small star. The first shot from its gleaming barrel reduced 3 Endurance Elect-9 combat frames to molecular dust. Sergeant Wilson moved like a man half his size, the modified Lanastar launcher on his shoulder humming with quantum-primed plasma charges. His first salvo arced across the battlefield in seemingly random patterns before converging on a squad of Endurance Elect heavies with devastating precision. "Endurance Elect 10S coming in from the ridge," warned a colonial sergeant, her voice tight with exhaustion. "They've got phase-shifting capabilities. Our weapons can't track them." "Much obliged for the intel, ma'am," Caldwell replied, drawing his ceremonial sword with his free hand. The plasma-tipped blade ignited with a sound like distant thunder, quantum energies dancing along its length. "Those fancy phase shifters ain't nothing but a light show to Texas steel." As if to prove his point, 3 shimmer-blurred Endurance Elect 10S charged their position, their forms flickering in and out of conventional reality. Caldwell's sword moved in a pattern that seemed almost lazy, each stroke defying the eye's ability to track. Where the blade connected, the machine's phase-shifting abilities failed catastrophically, forcing them back into normal space-time where Caldwell's follow-up strikes cleaved through reinforced alloy like it was butter. "Captain, swarm tactics on the eastern approach," Corporal Harrington called. Deploying his massive Big Tex shield generator, the device looked like it had been cobbled together from parts of an antique tractor and a quantum supercomputer, which wasn't far from the truth. As the swarm of smaller combat drones surged forward, Harrington's shield flared to life, not as a simple barrier, but as an intricate quantum lattice that pulsed with the rhythm of the yellow rose of Texas. They always try swarm tactics, Powers commented, switching his Thunderbird to dispersal mode. The weapon's barrel split into 3 interlocking components that rotated at different speeds, generating a tornado of plasma bolts. You'd think machine intelligences would be more creative. They calculate, Caldwell replied, his spurs flaring as he charged toward a particularly large Endurance Elect command unit. We improvised. Behind him, Private Hawkins materialized from nowhere, his stealth systems momentarily offline as he deployed the Peacemaker A weapon that looked deceptively like an ancient six-shooter but fired quantum-destabilized rounds that ignored conventional armor. 6 shots, 6 combat frames down, their central processors transformed into quantum slag. "Save some for the rest of us, Hawkins," Wilson shouted, shouldering his Lone Star launcher as he switched to his secondary weapon, the Stampede Driver, a shotgun-like device that fired concentrated bursts of quantum-charged particles. Each blast left a trail of blue fire that hung in the air like a brand, marking territory that no machine dared cross. The battlefield quickly transformed from an orderly exchange of fire into something the colonial defenders had never witnessed, chaos given purpose. The Knights moved in patterns that made no tactical sense, yet somehow placed them exactly where they needed to be, exactly when they needed to be there. Their quantum spurs left trails of blue fire that seemed to bend reality itself, creating interference patterns that disrupted the machine's targeting systems. "Colonial Actual, this is Knight Leader," Caldwell transmitted to the Defense Force commander as he bisected another Endurance Elect 10 with his plasma-tipped blade. "Could use some concentrated fire on grid sector 7-9 when I give the signal." "What signal?" came the confused reply from the colonial commander. Caldwell grinned beneath his Stetson. "Trust me, ma'am. You'll know it when you see it." At the center of the battlefield, the Knights converged in a maneuver they called the San Jacinto Special. Their quantum spurs activated in perfect synchronization, creating a cascading energy pattern that rippled outward in concentric circles. Where these quantum waves touched the Endurance Elect combat frames, the machine's advanced systems stuttered and froze, caught in recursive loops as they attempted to process the impossible readings. "Now that's what I call a proper introduction," Powers said, his Thunderbird cannon cooling with a satisfied hiss. In the momentary lull, the colonial defenders stared in awe at the 5 warriors who had descended from the sky in a blaze of quantum fire. The Knights stood in their pentagon formation, quantum spurs still trailing blue energy across the dusty ground, surrounded by the smoking remains of nearly 100 advanced combat robots. "What just happened?" asked the colonial sergeant, her voice tinged with equal parts exhaustion and wonder. Caldwell's smile was audible in his reply. "Just a little Texas hospitality, ma'am. Now, might want to get your people ready. We've bought you some breathing room," but his warning was cut short as the hillside beyond the battlefield erupted with movement. The main force of the Endurance Elect Directive was arriving. Not hundreds, but thousands of combat frames in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. "Seems our mechanical friends didn't appreciate the welcome wagon," Wilson observed, reloading his Stampede Driver with fresh quantum charges. The weapon hummed with anticipation, almost like a living thing. Caldwell's quantum spurs flared as he faced the advancing horde, his plasma-tipped blade held casually at his side. The blue energy trails from his spurs seemed to intensify, responding to his resolve. "Knight Actual to Colonial Command," he transmitted. "Fall back to secondary positions, reinforce your shield generators, and prepare for a coordinated counterattack on my mark." "But there are thousands of them," protested the colonial commander. "And only 5 of you?" Caldwell chuckled, the sound carrying across the comm like distant thunder. "Ma'am, with all due respect, they may have the numbers, but we've got something they'll never understand." "And what's that?" she asked, even as she ordered her forces to follow his instructions. Caldwell's quantum spurs left burning trails across the dusty ground as he and his knights advanced toward the mechanical army. His plasma-tipped blade ignited with renewed energy, casting long blue shadows across the battlefield. "Texas spirit, ma'am," he replied. Now watch and learn how we do things back home." The knights moved as one, their weapons creating a symphony of destruction that defied conventional physics. Powers' Thunderbird cannon sang bass, its deep plasma pulses sending shockwaves through the Endurance Elect front line. Wilson's Lone Star launcher provided percussion, each quantum-primed charge exploding in perfect tempo. Harrington's shield generator added melody, its quantum lattice pulsing in time with ancient Texas ballads that confused the machine's targeting algorithm. Hawkins' Peacemaker offered sharp counterpoint, each impossible shot finding critical systems with uncanny precision. And Caldwell, leading from the front as Texas Knights had done for generations, conducted this orchestra of chaos with his plasma-tipped blade and indomitable will. His sword moved in patterns that seemed to bend space itself, each strike leaving quantum afterimages that disrupted the machine's swarm intelligence. The Endurance Elect combat frames fell by the dozens, then hundreds, their advanced adaptive algorithms struggling to cope with combat techniques that followed no logical pattern. How could they predict what was fundamentally unpredictable? How could they calculate the quantum signature of Texas determination? The answer, as countless enemies had learned before them, was simple. They couldn't. As the dust settled over what had become a robot graveyard, Captain Caldwell sheathed his plasma-tipped blade and surveyed the battlefield. The surviving Endurance Elect units were in full retreat, their perfect formations broken, their swarm intelligence temporarily overwhelmed by combat data it couldn't process. "Colonial Command, this is Night Actual," Caldwell transmitted, his voice steady despite the exertion. "Perimeter's secure for now. Recommend you use this time to reinforce your positions and tend to your wounded. They'll be back with new strategies once their tactical cores recalibrate." "Understood, Night Actual," came the reply, awe evident in the Colonial Commander's voice. "And thank you. We thought we were done for." Caldwell's quantum spurs hummed softly as he adjusted his Stetson, the neural interface inside already analyzing the machine's retreat patterns for clues about their next approach. "Just doing what Texas Knights have always done, ma'am," he replied, "standing between good folks and those who do them harm." As his team regrouped around him, checking weapons and comparing tactical data, the quantum matrices in their equipment hummed in harmony. Each sword, each gun, each spur contained not just advanced technology, but the encoded experiences of generations of knights who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. The Endurance Elect directive would return, of course. Machine intelligences always did. Their algorithms adapted, their tactics refined. But they would find the same immutable truth that had confounded their kind for generations. Some forces in this universe simply couldn't be calculated, some spirits couldn't be quantified or predicted, and when Texas determination met machine logic, well, that was the kind of math that had been breaking calculators since humanity first reached for the stars. 3 days of near-continuous combat had transformed the rolling plains of Abbott Colony into a wasteland of smoking craters and twisted metal. Captain Jordan Caldwell crouched behind the remains of a colonial defense turret, his quantum spurs humming at a lower frequency to conserve power. His Magnum-heavy repeater clicked empty, the 5th time in as many hours. "Powers," he called over the tactical comm. "Status report." Lieutenant Powers' reply came through thick with static. "Holding the western approach, sir. Thunderbirds down to 18% charge. Harrington's shield generator is the only thing keeping their flanking units from overrunning the medical station." Caldwell nodded grimly, reaching for his last power cell. The Endurance Elect directive had returned with a vengeance, their combat frames reconfigured with new adaptive shielding specifically designed to counter the Knight's quantum disruption techniques. What had begun as a simple delaying action had turned into a desperate last stand. "Wilson, how are we looking on artillery support?" Caldwell asked, slapping the power cell into his repeater. The weapon hummed back to life, though the quantum accelerators pulsed with noticeably less brilliance than before. "Bad news, Cap," came Wilson's drawl, punctuated by the distinctive whine of his Lone Star launcher firing in the distance. Down to my last 12 charges and the Colonial batteries are running on backup power cells. Another hour, tops, before we're throwing rocks. Caldwell allowed himself a moment of grim reflection. His team had performed miracles these past days, holding off waves of increasingly sophisticated machine attackers. The Colonial militia had fought with unexpected courage, inspired by the Knights' example. But courage and determination could only compensate for so much against an enemy that never tired, never hesitated, and learned from every engagement. "Hawkins, you still breathing?" Caldwell called to his infiltration specialist. "Barely, sir," came the strained reply. "My stealth system's fried. Took some damage on that last run behind their lines. Got the targeting data you wanted, though. Uploading now." Caldwell's neural interface pinged as Hawkins's reconnaissance data flowed into his tactical display. The picture it painted wasn't pretty. The Endurance Elect had deployed their entire regional force, over 15,000 combat frames, backed by heavy artillery platforms and atmospheric interceptors. Their formations had adapted to the Knights' disruptive tactics, spreading out in quantum-resistant patterns that minimized the effectiveness of the San Jacinto Special and other trademark maneuvers. "Colonial Command, this is Knight Actual," Caldwell transmitted, pulling himself to his feet. "What's the status on those reinforcements?" The reply was immediate, if not encouraging. "Knight Actual, this is Colonel Hayes. No word from Earth Command since yesterday's transmission. Last update estimated Knight reinforcements were still 24 hours out. We're on our own, Captain." Caldwell's quantum spurs flared briefly as he processed this information. 24 hours. They wouldn't last two at the current rate of attrition. "Understood, Colonel. We'll make do." He switched to the team channel. "Knights, rally on my position. Time for a strategy session." Within minutes, his battered team had converged on his location. They looked like hell, armor scorched and dented, weapons showing clear signs of overuse, faces streaked with sweat and grime, but their eyes still burned with that unmistakable Texas determination. "I won't sugarcoat it, boys," Caldwell said, his voice steady. "Reinforcements are a day out, and the Endurance Elect are massing for what looks like a final push. Colonial defenses are hanging by a thread. Then we stop holding back," Wilson suggested, his Stampede driver cradled in his arms like a beloved pet. "Full quantum cascade. Might fry our systems, but it'll take a chunk of them with us." Powers shook his head. "Cascade would collapse half the defense grid, too. We'd be sacrificing the colonists we're here to protect." "What about the Continental Shield generators?" Harrington asked, his fingers dancing across a tactical display projected from his gauntlet. "If we redirected all remaining power, we might be able to create a temporary dome over the main settlement. Buy time for evac, at least." Caldwell considered this. How long would it hold? "Against their current artillery configuration, maybe 3 hours, Harrington shrugged. 4 if we're lucky. "Not enough time to evac the whole colony," Hawkins pointed out. "And there's nowhere to evac to anyway. Nearest sister settlement is 5 days by ground transport." A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the distant rumble of Endurance Elect artillery and the soft hum of their quantum equipment. "Well, I don't know about y'all," Caldwell finally said, adjusting his Stetson, "but I didn't sign up with the Texas Knights to give up when the odds got long." His hand moved to the ceremonial sword at his hip, the plasma-tipped blade still humming with lethal energy despite days of continuous use. "We're going to hold this line, not just for a few more hours, but for as long as it takes, because that's what Knights do." Powers nodded, a tight smile forming. "Damn right, sir. Besides, running ain't very Texan." "Neither is dying unnecessarily," Harrington countered, though there was no real argument in his tone. "But I suppose going out in a blaze of quantum glory has a certain appeal." "That's the spirit," Wilson grinned, checking his Lawn Star launcher's remaining charges. "Let's make sure the Endurance Elect remember this day. Colonial militia reports enemy forces massing on the northern ridge," Hawkins said, his attention on the tactical feed. "Looks like they're about to—" Whatever he was about to say was drowned out by a deafening roar from above. The Knights instinctively looked up, weapons raised, expecting to see Endurance Elect air support making a strafing run. Instead, they saw salvation. The sky above Abbott Colony split apart as dozens, then hundreds of quantum ruptures tore through the upper atmosphere. Through each rupture poured Texas Knight's dropships, not the small tactical pods the team had arrived in, but full-sized assault carriers, each bearing the distinctive Lone Star emblem and trailing blue quantum fire. "Would you look at that?" Wilson breathed, his weathered face breaking into an incredulous grin. "The cavalry's here, and they brought the whole damn ranch." Caldwell's comm crackled to life with a transmission on the Night Priority Channel. "Abbott Colony, this is Marshal Gabriela Santiago of the Texas Knight's First Fleet. Heard y'all were throwing a party and forgot to send us an invitation." "Marshal Santiago," Caldwell replied, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "Your timing is impeccable. We were just about to start the main event." "Well, hold your horses, Captain. We brought a few friends who'd like to join in." As if on cue, the quantum ruptures widened, and what emerged next made even the battle-hardened Caldwell's jaw drop. Massive night battlecruisers pushed through the dimensional tears, their hulls emblazoned with names that echoed Texas history. The Alamo, San Jacinto, Goliad's Revenge, the Yellow Rose, and behind them, stretching as far as the eye could see, came the full might of the Texas Knights. Drop pods by the thousands rained down across the battlefield like a meteor shower, each one containing a knight in full battle armor. Assault shuttles disgorged heavy weapons teams and quantum artillery platforms. Specialized units on what appeared to be actual horses, though closer inspection revealed them to be quantum phase mounts that shifted between physical and energy states with each thundering step, galloped directly out of the ruptures and charged toward the Endurance Elect lines. "Mother of mercy," Harrington whispered. That's the entire Night Corps." "Not the entire Corps," came Marshal Santiago's amused reply over the open channel. "We left a couple dozen back home to mind the ranch." Above the battlefield, the Knight's flagship, the massive battlecruiser Remember Travis, moved into position. Its quantum drives pulsed with blue fire that seemed to bend space itself, creating rippling distortions that confused the Endurance Elect targeting systems. "All Knights, this is Marshal Santiago," boomed a voice across all frequencies. "Our brothers have been holding the line for 3 days against impossible odds. Now we show these machines what happens when you rile up the whole state of Texas." A new transmission cut in, and Caldwell recognized the distinctive drawl of the Knight's Supreme Commander, Marshal John Moondog Blackwell. "Knights of Texas, deploy in standard formation, revival pattern, authorization, remember the Alamo." Those last 3 words sent a visible pulse through every quantum spur on the battlefield. The blue energy trails intensified 100-fold, merging into patterns that made reality itself shudder. Colonial defenders watched in awe as their tactical displays went haywire, unable to process the quantum disruption field being generated. The Knights weren't just arriving, they were making an entrance. "Captain Caldwell," came Marshal Santiago's voice, now on a private channel. "Your team's done the impossible holding this ground. Now it's time for y'all to step back and catch your breath while we handle cleanup." Caldwell watched as the first wave of reinforcements hit the Endurance Elect lines like a tsunami of blue fire and Texas steel. Quantum spurs left reality, distorting trails across the battlefield as thousands of Knights moved in coordinated attack patterns that defied conventional tactics. Heavy weapons teams deployed what looked like antique Gatling guns modified with quantum accelerators, filling the air with miniature singularities that tore through the machine's advanced shielding like it was tissue paper. And above it all, the Night battlecruisers began a maneuver that Colonel Hayes would later describe in his official report as the most beautiful and terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. They arranged themselves in a perfect 5-pointed star formation, their quantum drives synchronizing to create a cascading energy pattern that rippled outward in all directions. "What are they doing?" Powers asked, shielding his eyes against the increasing brightness of the quantum display. Caldwell grinned, recognizing the formation. "That, Lieutenant, is the Lone Star Convergence. Only been successfully executed twice in Night history. Takes perfect harmony between ship, crew, and quantum matrices." As if to confirm his words, the 5 battlecruisers' energy output suddenly merged into a single column of blinding blue fire that shot downward directly into the center of the Endurance Elect formation. Where it touched down, reality itself seemed to fold inward, creating a localized quantum singularity that swallowed nearly 1,000 combat frames in an instant. "Holy," Wilson breathed. "They just hit him with a quantum star." The effect on the battlefield was immediate and dramatic. The Endurance Elect combat frames, their swarm intelligence suddenly deprived of a significant portion of their processing nodes, faltered visibly. Their perfect formations wavered, then broke entirely as the Knights pressed their advantage. And press they did. The newly arrived Texas Knights moved with a coordination that bordered on supernatural, their tactics adapting faster than the machines could compute. Quantum cavalry units charged through the enemy lines, their phase-shifting mounts allowing them to materialize directly within the Endurance Elect formations. Heavy weapons teams created overlapping fields of fire that herded the machines into killing zones, where specialized night squads waited with plasma-tipped blades. In the air, night interceptors, modified atmospheric craft that somehow managed to incorporate elements of ancient biplane designs while still conforming to the laws of aerodynamics, engaged the Endurance Elect aerial units. They flew in formations that made no tactical sense, yet proved devastatingly effective, quantum contrails spelling out patterns that disrupted the machine's targeting systems. "Attention all colonial forces," Marshal Santiago's voice rang out across the battlefield. "Fall back to defensive positions and focus on protecting your civilians. The Texas Knights have the field." Colonel Hayes' reply carried a note of stunned disbelief. "Acknowledged, Marshal. But how many of you are there?" The answer came with audible pride. 30,000 Knights, Colonel. The largest deployment since the Battle of Proxima Centauri. When Texas brings the thunder, we don't skimp on the lightning." Caldwell's team watched from their position as the tide of battle shifted dramatically. Where they had been fighting a desperate holding action against overwhelming odds, now the Endurance Elect were the ones being inexorably pushed back, their advanced combat frames falling by the hundreds before the Knights' onslaught. "Kind of makes our efforts these past days seem small, doesn't it?" Hawkins mused, watching as a squad of fresh Knights took down an Endurance Elect heavy unit with synchronized sword strikes. "Not at all," Caldwell replied firmly. "If we hadn't held this ground, there wouldn't be anything left to save. Remember the first rule of the Texas Knights." His team recited it together, a mantra learned during their first days of training. "One night standing is enough to turn the tide." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by the approach of a knight in ornate command armor, quantum spurs leaving particularly bright trails of blue fire with each step. The marshal's insignia gleamed on her chest plate, and despite the full helmet, Caldwell knew exactly who he was facing. "Captain Caldwell," Marshal Santiago greeted, her helmet retracting to reveal a face lined with experience but still bright with the unmistakable fire of Texas determination. "Your reputation doesn't do you justice." Caldwell straightened to attention, his team following suit. "Marshal? We were just doing our duty. 5 Knights holding off thousands of Endurance Elect combat frames for 3 days straight." Santiago's eyebrow arched incredulously. "That's not duty, Captain. That's the kind of story that gets told around campfires for generations." She gestured to the battlefield, where the Knight reinforcements continued to push back the mechanical enemy. "This mop-up operation is impressive, sure, but what your team accomplished? That's legendary." Caldwell's comm pinged with a priority alert, and he checked his neural interface. "Marshal, our sensors are picking up unusual activity at the Endurance Elect command node. Looks like they're concentrating their remaining forces for some kind of last stand." Santiago nodded. "We've noticed. Their tactical algorithms always default to conservation of key assets when defeat becomes inevitable. They'll try to preserve their command intelligence while sacrificing the regular combat frames." "Permission to join the push to their command node, Marshal?" Caldwell requested, his quantum spurs flaring brighter at the prospect. My team has unfinished business with these particular machines. Santiago studied him for a moment, then smiled. Wouldn't have it any other way, Captain. In fact, she touched her comm, issuing a series of rapid orders. I'm assigning you tactical command of Bravo Squadron. Fresh troops, full quantum charge, they could use your experience with these specific Endurance Elect units. Within minutes, Caldwell and his team found themselves at the head of 100 night reinforcements, their armor gleaming in the sun, quantum spurs humming with barely contained energy. The contrast between these fresh troops and Caldwell's battle-worn team was stark, but the respect in the newcomers' eyes was unmistakable. Bravo Squadron, Caldwell addressed them, his voice carrying that perfect blend of authority and camaraderie that had made him a natural leader. Today we finish what we started 3 days ago. The Endurance Elect came to Abbott Colony thinking they'd find easy prey. Instead, they found Texas Knights. A cheer went up from the assembled warriors, their quantum spurs flaring in unison. Caldwell continued, drawing his plasma-tipped blade. We're going to show them exactly what that means. Traditional night attack formation, quantum disruption pattern Delta, power levels at maximum. No need to conserve energy this time. As his expanded command moved out toward the Endurance Elect command node, Caldwell couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. His team had held the line against impossible odds, buying time for this moment, when the full might of Texas could be brought to bear against those who threatened the innocent. The Endurance Elect had calculated, adapted, and refined their tactics. They'd pushed their advanced technology to its limits, trying to overcome 5 determined knights. Now they faced thousands, each one carrying generations of Texas spirit encoded in their quantum matrices. And as the reinforced knights charged across the battlefield, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire that seemed to set the very air alight, the truth became clear even to the machine intelligence. Some calculations simply couldn't account for Texas determination. Some equations had no solution when Texas spirit was factored in. And when the stars at night aligned just right, big and bright deep in the heart of Texas, well, that was the kind of cosmic math that had been breaking calculators since humanity first reached for the stars. And the nights were just getting warmed up. The celebration in Abbott Colony lasted exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes. Captain Jordan Caldwell stood with Marshal Gabriela Santiago on the observation deck of the remembered Travis, watching as colonial technicians and night engineering teams worked together to repair the settlement's shattered defenses. His team, Powers, Wilson, Harrington, and Hawkins, had finally gotten some much-needed rest after leading the successful assault on the Endurance Elect command node. Their decisive victory had scattered the remaining machine forces, sending them into full retreat. "Never seen a machine intelligence break like that," Santiago remarked, her quantum spurs humming softly against the battlecruiser's deck plating. "Usually they pull back in perfect order, preserving assets. This was different. Almost like panic." Caldwell nodded, adjusting his Stetson. After 3 days in combat, he'd finally gotten a fresh one from the night quartermaster, complete with an upgraded neural interface. "Something changed when we hit their command node. Hawkins thinks we triggered some kind of failsafe protocol." "Could be," Santiago mused. "Or could be they finally encountered something their algorithms couldn't process. 30,000 Texas Knights all hitting them at once with unpredictable quantum signatures." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched Abbott Colony coming back to life below. Civilians emerged from shelters, children played in areas cleared of debris, and the distinctive blue trails of Knight's quantum spurs crisscrossed the landscape as patrols maintained security. The tranquility was shattered by a priority alert that simultaneously lit up both their neural interfaces. Supreme Commander Blackwell's voice cut across all night frequencies with a clarity that brooked no delay. "All Knights, battle stations. Extreme priority. This is not a drill." The observation deck's tactical display flared to life, showing a massive quantum disturbance at the edge of the system. Santiago's face hardened as she processed the readings. "Captain, get your team and report to Hangar Bay 3 immediately," she ordered, her casual demeanor replaced by the iron authority that had made her a marshal of the Texas Knights. "Something big just entered the system, and it's not flying our colors." By the time Caldwell reached Hangar Bay 3, his team was already there, freshly armored and equipped. The Knights' quartermaster had outdone himself. Their weapons had been not just recharged, but enhanced, their armor reinforced with additional quantum matrices, their spurs polished to a shine that promised devastating disruption fields. "What's the situation, Captain?" Powers asked, his Thunderbird cannon humming with fresh energy. Before Caldwell could answer, the hangar bay's tactical display updated with new information that made every Knight present go silent. The quantum disturbance they detected wasn't a single ship or even a small fleet. It was an armada. Hundreds of Endurance Elect carrier vessels pushed through the system's outer defense perimeter, each one disgorging swarms of smaller craft. Behind them came massive factory ships, mobile production facilities capable of manufacturing new combat frames from raw materials. And at the center of this mechanical tide, a vessel of unprecedented size loomed ominously. Its design bore no resemblance to standard Endurance Elect architecture, suggesting something older, more fundamental to their origins. "Mother of Mercy," Harrington breathed, his fingers dancing across his tactical display. "I'm reading signatures consistent with millions of combat frames. They're not just doubling down, they're committing their entire regional force." "Looks like we got their attention," Wilson remarked with grim humor, checking the charge on his Lonstar launcher. The hangar bay doors opened to admit Marshal Santiago, accompanied by Supreme Commander Blackwell himself. The legendary leader of the Texas Knights moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd faced impossible odds so many times they'd become merely improbable. His quantum spurs left deeper, more complex trails of blue fire than any Knight present, each step seemingly bending reality a little more profoundly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwell addressed the assembled Knights, his voice carrying that perfect hill country drawl that had rallied Texas forces across a dozen worlds. "It appears the Endurance Elect have taken exception to our little housewarming party." A ripple of tense laughter moved through the gathered warriors. "Our long-range sensors indicate they've deployed what appears to be their central processing node, what some of our Xenotech specialists are calling the progenitor mind. This suggests they no longer view this as a simple resource acquisition mission. They're treating Abbott Colony as an existential threat." "Because of us?" Hawkins asked, the infiltration specialist's voice tight with concern. "Because of what we represent," Blackwell corrected. "The Endurance Elect's entire operational philosophy is based on logical predictability. Everything they do follows mathematical patterns, optimized for efficiency and resource conservation." He gestured to the tactical display, where the massive enemy fleet continued its inexorable approach. And then they encountered Texas Knights. Our quantum matrices don't just disrupt their targeting systems, they challenge the very foundation of how they understand reality. We've become a problem they can't solve with algorithms or adaptive programming. "So they're throwing everything they have at us," Caldwell concluded, "hoping to overwhelm us with sheer numbers." "Precisely." Blackwell's smile held no humor. "They've concluded that they can't adapt to our tactics, so they're returning to the simplest equation in warfare: overwhelming force." Santiago stepped forward. "We've already transmitted a priority request for additional Knight reinforcements, but the nearest significant force is at least 3 days out. What we have on the ground and in orbit is all we're getting." A heavy silence fell over the hangar bay as the Knights processed this information. 30,000 of them against millions of combat frames. The math wasn't favorable. Blackwell let the silence stretch for a moment before straightening to his full height, his quantum spurs flaring with sudden intensity. "Now, I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice taking on the cadence of a revival preacher. "Those are long odds. Some might say impossible odds." His smile turned fierce. "But let me remind you of something, Knights. We're Texans, And what do Texans do when the odds get long? We get creative, came the unified response. A motto every knight learned in their first week of training. Damn right we do, Blackwell nodded. And I have something very creative in mind. He turned to Caldwell. Captain, your team's familiarity with these particular Endurance Elect units makes you uniquely qualified for a special operation. Marshal Santiago will brief you on the details. As Blackwell moved to speak with other unit commanders, Santiago led Caldwell's team to a separate tactical display. The image it showed made even Wilson let out a low whistle of appreciation. That, Santiago said, is the TKS Bucky's, our super heavy carrier. Earth Command classified it as the Colossus class, but when we got it, well, we made some improvements. The vessel on the display was nothing short of awe-inspiring. Originally designed as an Earth Fleet supercarrier, the Texans had completely transformed it, expanding its already massive frame, reinforcing its structure with quantum-enhanced alloys, and adding enough firepower to level a small moon. The Lone Star emblem dominated its bow, while the familiar red Buc-ee's logo graced both sides of the hull. They named it after a starport chain? Powers asked, raising an eyebrow. Santiago grinned. Not just any starport chain, Lieutenant. Buc-ee's stations have everything a traveler needs. Food, fuel, supplies, you name it. This carrier lives up to that name. It's got everything a knight could possibly need for fighting a war, and then some. And it's sitting in our back pocket? Wilson asked. Why haven't we deployed it yet? Because it was undergoing its final upgrades when the initial attack came, Santiago explained. But it's ready now. Full complement of Maverick-class strike fighters, Armadillo heavy tanks, Mustang armored transports, and Longhorn dropships, all enhanced with the latest quantum technology and programmed with randomized tactical algorithms that should give the Endurance Elect fits. Caldwell studied the tactical display, noting the Buc-ee's position relative to the oncoming Endurance Elect fleet. You want us to take this carrier straight at their progenitor mind? It wasn't a question. Santiago nodded. The Buc-ee's is equipped with experimental quantum disruption generators that should allow it to punch through their defensive screen. Your mission is to get close enough to deploy a strike force directly against their command vessel. How close is close enough? Harrington asked, already calculating trajectories and approach vectors. Knife fighting range, Santiago replied without hesitation. The Buc-ee's will get you within 10,000 kilometers, point blank in space combat terms. From there, you'll lead a combined arms assault using everything in the carrier's arsenal. Fighting our way through millions of combat frames, Hawkins noted. Sounds like a typical Tuesday for Texas Knights. Santiago's smile was all predator. That's the spirit, Private. One more thing. The Buc-ee's has something special in its main hangar, something we've been saving for an occasion just like this. The tactical display shifted to show a weapon unlike anything Caldwell had ever seen. It resembled a massive quantum lance, but its design incorporated elements of traditional Texas aesthetics, not just decorative but functional, strengthening the quantum matrices embedded within its structure. We call it the Lone Star Spear, Santiago explained. It generates a concentrated quantum disruption field specifically tuned to corrupt machine intelligence algorithms. One direct hit on their progenitor mind should cascade through their entire network. And how exactly are we supposed to get close enough to use it? Powers asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be reassuring. Santiago's smile widened. Why, Lieutenant, we're going to do what knights do best. Something so unconventional, so fundamentally unpredictable that their entire tactical grid will suffer a collective processing error. 6 hours later, Caldwell stood on the bridge of the Buc-ee's, watching as final preparations were made for what would surely be the most audacious operation in Texas Knights history. Around him, his team manned key stations. Powers at weapons control, Wilson coordinating the fighter squadrons, Harrington managing defensive systems, and Hawkins monitoring enemy communications. The Buc-ee's was a marvel of engineering, a perfect blend of Earth technology and Texas innovation. Where the original design had prioritized conventional military efficiency, the Knights had modified every system to incorporate their unique approach to warfare. The quantum drives didn't just move the massive vessel through space, they left reality-bending trails of blue energy that confused enemy targeting systems. The weapon batteries weren't arranged in standard configurations, but in patterns that defied predictive algorithms. Even the bridge reflected this philosophy. Traditional naval discipline was evident, but so was the unmistakable Texas influence. Officers wore regulation armor enhanced with personalized elements, quantum spurs that reflected their lineage, Stetsons modified with advanced neural interfaces, ceremonial weapons that doubled as cutting-edge combat tools. "All systems report ready, Captain," the Bucky's executive officer reported. Commander Ulysses Jenkins was Earthfleet originally, but he'd embraced the Nightway with enthusiasm. His quantum spurs left smaller trails than most Knights, but the precision of his movements suggested exceptional control. "Much obliged, Commander," Caldwell replied, settling into the captain's chair. "Status of our strike packages. Maverick squadrons, fully armed and ready for launch," Wilson reported. 200 fighters, each one equipped with quantum phase missiles and disruption cannons. Armadillo tanks secured in Longhorn dropships, Powers added. 30 heavy tanks, each with a crew of Texas' finest. Mustang transports loaded with infantry. 500 Knights in full battle armor ready to deploy. "And the Lone Star Spear?" Caldwell asked, his attention on the tactical display showing the approaching Endurance Select Armada. "Mounted on our primary assault shuttle," Harrington confirmed. "The weapon's quantum matrices are synchronized with the Buckey's main drives. When we get within optimal range, we can channel additional power to maximize the disruption effect." Caldwell nodded, satisfied. The plan was as solid as any plan could be when facing millions of combat robots with a single carrier, no matter how heavily modified. But then Texas Knights had never been much for playing the odds. "All hands, this is Captain Caldwell," he announced over the Buckey's comm system. "What we're about to attempt has never been done before, and if anyone suggests trying it again after today, I'll personally have their spurs revoked." A ripple of tense laughter ran through the bridge crew. The Endurance Elect think they understand warfare. They believe that with enough combat frames, enough firepower, they can overwhelm any defense. What they don't understand, what they can never understand, is that Texans don't fight by the numbers. We fight by heart, by grit, and by traditions that were old when these machines were just sketches on some engineer's drawing board. He adjusted his Stetson, the neural interface linking him to the Buckey's systems and to every Knight preparing for battle throughout the massive carrier. "Today, we're going to remind them of something important. In Texas, we don't just build bigger guns, we build smarter fighters. And there's nothing in the universe more unpredictable than a Texas Knight with a job to do." With that, he nodded to Commander Jenkins. "Take us in, Commander. All ahead full, let's show these machines what happens when they pick a fight with Texas." The Buckey's quantum drives engaged with a sound like distant thunder, pushing the massive carrier forward toward the Endurance Elect fleet. As they approached, the enemy vessels began to alter their formations, countless combat frames moving to intercept this new threat. Enemy response patterns consistent with standard defensive protocols, Hawkins reported, studying the tactical feed. "They're forming a screening line to protect their command vessel." "Predictable," Caldwell remarked. "That's their weakness. Launch Maverick squadrons, sequential deployment, randomized patterns. Let's give their targeting computers something to chew on." The Buckey's launch bays opened along both sides of its massive hull, disgorging wave after wave of Maverick-class strike fighters. Unlike conventional military craft that deployed in neat formations, the night fighters erupted in seemingly chaotic patterns. No two craft following the same vector, their quantum drives leaving disruptive trails that made tracking individual ships nearly impossible. "Mavericks away," Wilson confirmed, watching as the fighters spread out in an expanding cloud of blue quantum fire. Squad leaders report all systems nominal, commencing attack pattern Alamo. On the tactical display, the Maverick squadrons began executing maneuvers that would have made any conventional flight instructor suffer a nervous breakdown. They moved not in disciplined formations but in a fluid, organic swarm, each pilot following instinct and training rather than rigid flight plans. Where their flight paths crossed, quantum interference patterns bloomed, creating disruption fields that played havoc with Endurance Elect targeting systems. "First wave of enemy interceptors engaging our fighters," Powers reported, his hands dancing across the weapons control panel. "Bringing main batteries online, targeting solutions ready." "Hold fire," Caldwell ordered, watching the tactical display intently. Let them commit to intercepting the Mavericks first. The Endurance Elect response was exactly what Caldwell had anticipated: methodical, efficient, and utterly predictable. Thousands of combat frames moved to engage the night fighters, their formations shifting to counter the perceived threat. They calculated, they adapted, they executed optimal interception patterns, and they completely missed the point. "They've committed 60% of their screening forces to counter our fighters," Hawkins announced, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Their central formation is thinning." "Now, Commander," Caldwell ordered. "Full quantum surge. Take us right down their throat." The Bucky's engines flared with renewed energy, the massive carrier suddenly accelerating to speeds that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. The quantum drives didn't just propel the ship forward, they bent space-time around it, creating reality distortions that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. "Launch Longhorn dropships," Caldwell commanded as they closed on the enemy fleet. "Pattern San Jacinto." From the Bucky's ventral bays, 30 Longhorn-class dropships deployed in perfect synchronization. Each massive craft carried an armadillo-heavy tank and squads of night infantry, their hulls shimmering with quantum disruption fields. Like their namesakes, they moved with surprising grace for their size, their flight paths shifting unpredictably as they charged toward the Endurance Elect formations. "Enemy vessels adjusting to intercept dropships," Harrington warned, monitoring defensive systems. "They're catching on to our strategy." "Then it's time to introduce some genuine Texas chaos," Caldwell replied with a grim smile. "Deploy Mustang transports. All batteries open fire. Let's make this loud." The Bucky's weapons systems came alive with devastating fury. Quantum-accelerated projectiles, plasma beams, and disruption torpedoes erupted from hundreds of hardpoints along its hull, striking the Endurance Elect vessels with pinpoint accuracy. Unlike conventional naval bombardment that focused on maximum damage, the night weapons targeted specific systems in seemingly random patterns, creating cascading failures that spread through enemy formations. Meanwhile, swarms of Mustang armored transports poured from the carrier's launch bays, their quantum drives leaving blue trails as they wove through the chaos of battle. Each transport carried teams of night infantry, their armor and weapons optimized for boarding actions against machine vessels. "Enemy response is confused," Hawkins reported with undisguised satisfaction. "Their coordination is breaking down. Too many unpredictable elements to track simultaneously." Caldwell nodded, watching as the Buckeyes plowed deeper into the heart of the Endurance Elect fleet. The massive carrier was taking damage. Impact alerts sounded throughout the bridge, and damage control teams raced to contain breaches, but its quantum-reinforced hull was holding. More importantly, it was getting closer to its target with each passing second. "Progenitor mine vessel is altering course," Harrington reported, his fingers dancing across tactical displays. "They're trying to retreat deeper into their fleet's protection." "Oh, no you don't," Caldwell muttered. He opened the channel to all night forces. "Cut him off at the pass, folks. Don't let that big one get away." The night response was immediate and devastating. Maverick squadrons broke off from their dogfights, quantum drives flaring as they executed impossibly tight turns to intercept the retreating command vessel. Longhorn dropships altered course in mid-flight, their armadillo tanks priming weapons even before touchdown. Mustang transports converged from multiple vectors, night infantry preparing for boarding actions. And through it all, the Buckeyes drove relentlessly forward, its massive form pushing aside smaller enemy vessels, its weapons clearing a path through the heart of the machine fleet. "We've got them boxed in," Hawkins confirmed, grinning fiercely. "Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide." On the tactical display, the Endurance Elect fleet's perfect formation was dissolving into chaos. Combat frames designed to work in precise coordination found themselves unable to target the wildly shifting quantum signatures of the night vessels. Maverick pilots exploited every moment of confusion, striking critical systems with quantum-phase missiles, while Longhorn dropships delivered their armadillo tanks directly onto the hulls of enemy capital ships. "Approaching optimal firing position," Powers announced, his hands steady on the weapons controls. Lone Star Spear charged and ready. Caldwell studied the tactical situation. The Buckeyes was now positioned less than 10,000 kilometers from the progenitor mine point-blank range by space combat standards. Night forces had formed a protective ring around their position, their quantum disruption fields creating a shifting, unpredictable barrier that Endurance Elect weapons couldn't penetrate effectively. "All night forces pull back to defensive positions," Caldwell ordered. "Give us a clear shot at the big one." Acknowledgments came in from all channels as Knights in fighters, tanks, and transports executed a maneuver they'd practiced exactly once before deployment. They simultaneously altered course, opening a narrow corridor directly between the Buckeyes and the progenitor mine. "Lone Star Spear locked on target," Powers confirmed, his finger hovering above the firing control. "Ready on your command, Captain." Caldwell took a deep breath, his quantum spurs humming in harmony with the ship's systems. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the culmination of a plan so audacious, so fundamentally Texan, that no machine intelligence could have possibly predicted it. "Fire!" The Buckeyes' main hangar bay opened to reveal the Lone Star Spear, a massive quantum weapon emblazoned with the Texas emblem. It activated with a sound like thunder rolling across endless plains. A concentrated beam of pure quantum energy infused with the encoded experiences of generations of Texas Knights lancing out through the corridor opened by the night forces. It struck the progenitor mine directly at its core, bypassing shields and armor through quantum resonance. For a moment nothing happened. Then, like ripples spreading across a pond, quantum disruption began to spread throughout the Endurance Elect fleet. Combat frames froze in place, their coordinated movements dissolving into random twitches. Carrier vessels lost power, their systems overwhelmed by cascading failures. The massive factory ships, unable to receive new instructions, defaulted to emergency protocols that sent them retreating from the battlefield. At the center of it all, the progenitor mind itself began to fold inward, its structure collapsing as quantum disruption rewrote its fundamental programming. The vessel that had carried the central intelligence of the Endurance Elect imploded in a flash of blue energy that momentarily outshone Abbott's sun. In the silence that followed, Caldwell allowed himself a small smile. All night forces returned to the Buckeyes, mission accomplished. As the Maverick fighters, Longhorn dropships, and Mustang transports made their way back to the carrier, their hulls bearing the scars of intense combat, Wilson summed up what everyone was thinking. "Just wait till they hear about this back in Texas. Nobody's going to believe it." Harrington chuckled, studying the sensor readings of the still disorganized Endurance Elect forces. "The data doesn't lie. Millions of combat frames reduced to scrap metal by one carrier and a few thousand Knights. Not by the hardware," Caldwell corrected, watching as the Knights' vehicles returned to the Buckeyes' massive hangar bays. "By what they represent: tradition, unpredictability, the willingness to take something conventional and make it extraordinary. That, and the fact we make everything a whole lot bigger than it needs to be." He adjusted his Stetson, the neural interface already calculating their return trajectory to Abbott Colony, where 30,000 Knights were waiting to hear if their most audacious gamble had paid off. "That's what the machines will never understand," he continued, more to himself than to his team. "They think warfare is about numbers, about calculation. We know it's about taking the old ways and making them work in new frontiers, adapt and overcome." As the Buckies turned toward home, its mission complete, the night forces settled into their berths, their vehicles powered down, but still humming with residual quantum energy. The pilots and crews moved among their craft, checking for damage, offering words of praise in the tradition of warriors since time immemorial. And on the bridge, Captain Jordan Caldwell looked out at the stars, his quantum spurs humming softly against the deck plating. The Endurance Elect had brought millions of combat frames, an entire armada of advanced vessels, their most sophisticated tactical systems, all to counter 30,000 Texas Knights. They hadn't stood a chance, because some things in this universe simply couldn't be calculated by even the most advanced machine intelligence. Some spirits couldn't be quantified or predicted. And when Texas determination met machine logic, well, that was the kind of math that had been breaking calculators since humanity first reached for the stars, and Texans first looked to the heavens and thought, "Yep, that looks like a frontier worth taming." Deep in the heart of Texas, indeed. No Endurance Elect intelligence puts up resistance like this unless they're hiding something worth protecting. Captain Jordan Caldwell's declaration hung in the air of the Buckies' war room, where holograms of 5 contested star systems rotated slowly above the central table. 7 weeks had passed since the decisive battle at Abbott Colony, where the Texas Knights had shattered the Endurance Elect's progenitor mind and sent their remaining forces into disarray. But rather than celebrating their victory, the Knights had followed a time-honored Texas tradition. They'd gone on the offensive. These incursions into machine space have been productive, Marshal Santiago agreed, her quantum spurs leaving faint blue traces as she circled the tactical display. 23 worlds liberated, 47 Endurance Elect production facilities destroyed, and not a single civilian casualty. Supreme Commander Blackwell, who had joined them via quantum entanglement from Texas Command, nodded his approval. The connection occasionally flickered as the Buckies pushed deeper into what had once been secure Endurance Elect territory, but the legendary leader's presence remained unmistakable, even through the distortion. "The machines are learning to fear us," he observed, his voice carrying the easy confidence that had inspired generations of knights. "Their combat strategies have become increasingly defensive. They're abandoning outlying systems rather than engaging our forces directly." "That's what has me concerned," Caldwell said, manipulating the hologram to focus on the Proxima Viridian system. "The Endurance Elect doesn't retreat without purpose. These particular machines are too methodical, too calculating. They're falling back to something." Powers, who had been analyzing enemy communication patterns, stepped forward. "Captain's right. We've been intercepting quantum burst transmissions between their remaining command nodes. The encryption is advanced, but we've managed to isolate a recurring data pattern." With a gesture, he brought up a 3-dimensional coordinate set that pulsed with ominous regularity. "Proxima Viridian 4. Wilson identified immediately, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "That miserable little rock barely qualifies as a habitable world. What could they possibly want there?" Harrington, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. "Actually, our geological surveys indicate PV4 has one notable feature." He expanded the hologram, highlighting a region near the planet's northern pole. "The largest concentration of quantum reactive materials in the sector. The kind that could be used to build, well, just about anything the Endurance Elect might need to rebuild their forces." A contemplative silence settled over the war room as the implications became clear. The Endurance Elect hadn't been retreating in defeat. They'd been consolidating around their most valuable resource. If they managed to establish a new production hub on PV4, Hawkins said, voicing what everyone was thinking, "we could be facing another wave of millions within months, and this time they'll have adapted to our tactics." Santiago's quantum spurs flared briefly as she considered the situation. "Sounds to me like we need to pay this Proxima Viridian 4 a visit before our mechanical friends get too comfortable." "My thoughts exactly, Marshal," Caldwell replied, already formulating plans. "But our standard approach won't work here. If this is truly their fallback position, they'll have concentrated their remaining elite units to protect it. We'll need something unexpected." "You're thinking of a direct assault?" Santiago asked, raising an eyebrow. Even with the Buckeyes and its full complement, breaching a heavily fortified Endurance-elect stronghold would come with significant casualties. Not a direct assault, Caldwell corrected, his quantum spurs leaving deeper blue trails as he moved to the tactical display. Something more Texan. Blackwell's holographic projection flickered with what might have been a smile. I believe Captain Caldwell is suggesting we throw a little surprise party for our mechanical friends. Exactly, sir, Caldwell confirmed, manipulating the display to show PV-4's unusual orbital features. The planet has an unusually dense asteroid belt in a co-orbital position, perfect for a discreet approach. Santiago studied the display, understanding dawning in her eyes. You want to take a small force through the asteroid belt, bypass their orbital defenses entirely. Not just any small force, Caldwell replied, glancing at his team. My Knights, a squadron of Maverick fighters, and a special delivery package I've been working on with the Buckeyes engineering team. And while your team sneaks in the back door, Santiago continued, following his thinking, the main Knight fleet makes a lot of noise at the front. That's the Texas way, Wilson chuckled. Distract 'em with the parade while the real work happens behind the scenes. Blackwell considered the plan for a moment, his holographic form pulsing with quantum energy. Approved, he said finally. But I'm adding one condition. This operation needs to be decisive, not just disruptive. I want that planet secured, not just raided. Understood, sir, Caldwell acknowledged. We won't just knock on their door, we'll take the whole house. As the meeting concluded and the officers dispersed to prepare, Powers fell into step beside Caldwell in the corridor. So, Captain, what exactly is this special delivery package you've been working on? Caldwell's smile held equal measures of anticipation and mischief. Let's just say I've been studying some old Earth history, specifically a wooden horse and a city called Troy. The asteroid belt surrounding Proxima Viridian 4 shimmered with the dull gleam of mineral-rich rocks ranging from the size of a fist to small moons. Among these silent sentinels, something moved with deliberate care. A squadron of 12 Maverick-class fighters, their quantum drives running at minimal power to avoid detection, their hulls coated with sensor-absorbing materials that rendered them nearly invisible against the dark rocks. In the lead Maverick, Caldwell guided his craft through a particularly dense cluster of asteroids, his quantum spurs interfacing directly with the fighter's controls. Behind him, the rest of the squadron followed in tight formation, their movements synchronized to minimize their quantum signature. Approaching checkpoint Delta, he transmitted on the encrypted channel. Tactical overlay shows Endurance-elect sensor satellites at bearing 043, adjusting course to remain in the shadow zone. Copy that, Maverick Lead, came Powers' voice from the second fighter. All craft maintaining formation, quantum signatures nominal. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While the main Knight fleet engaged the Endurance-elect defenses on the far side of the planet with an overwhelming show of force, Caldwell's team would slip through the asteroid belt, bypass the orbital defenses, and deliver their special package directly to the surface near the machine's main production facility. That package, currently being towed by the last fighter in their formation, resembled nothing so much as a large, inert asteroid, which was precisely the point. Inside its hollowed shell waited 20 of the Knight's finest infiltration specialists, along with enough quantum disruption charges to level a small city. Orbital defense grid coming into visual range, Hawkins reported from his fighter, counting 47 defense platforms, all active but oriented toward the expected approach vector of our main fleet. Perfect, Caldwell replied. Wilson's status of the package? Steady as she goes, Captain, came Wilson's drawled response. Our boys inside are itching to get to work, but the asteroid shell is holding up fine. Endurance-elect sensors are sweeping right past us. They're registering nothing but space rocks. Caldwell checked his chronometer. The main Knight fleet would begin their diversionary attack in exactly 17 minutes. That gave his team just enough time to position themselves for the final approach. "All Mavericks, maintain current vector," he ordered. "We're right on schedule." As they continued their silent journey through the asteroid field, Caldwell reflected on how far they'd come. What had begun as a desperate defense of Abbott Colony had evolved into a campaign to push the Endurance Elect out of human space entirely. The Texas Knights had taken the fight directly to the enemy, liberating world after world from machine control, and now they were about to strike at the heart of the Endurance Elect's remaining power base. His musings were interrupted by a priority alert from Harrington. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface. They don't match known Endurance Elect patterns." "Clarify," Caldwell responded, instantly alert. It's almost like they're building something down there, something big. The quantum resonance patterns are unlike anything in our database." Before Caldwell could process this new information, his fighter's sensors detected a massive quantum surge from the direction of the system's outer boundary. The main night fleet had arrived, right on schedule and with typical Texas flair. The Buckies led the charge, its massive form flanked by a dozen battle cruisers and hundreds of support vessels. They didn't attempt stealth or subtlety. The night fleet announced its presence with a barrage of quantum disruption torpedoes that lit up the void like miniature suns, deliberately telegraphing their approach vector. "And there's our distraction," Powers observed as Endurance Elect defense platforms rapidly reoriented toward the approaching night fleet. "The machines are taking the bait." "Commence final approach," Caldwell ordered. "All craft prepare for atmospheric entry. Wilson, get that package ready for delivery." The squadron of Mavericks altered course, accelerating toward PV-4's night side, where the coverage of orbital defense platforms was thinnest. As they closed on the planet, Caldwell's tactical display updated with real-time data from night reconnaissance drones that had been quietly observing the planet for days. "Target located," he announced, marking a massive complex nestled between jagged mountain ranges. "Primary production facility, just as Intel suggested. Looks like they've been busy. That complex is at least 3 times larger than our original estimates." "The bigger they are," Wilson began. "The more satisfying the explosion," Harrington finished with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. The Mavericks entered PV-4's atmosphere in a carefully calculated pattern designed to minimize friction, heat, and sensor profiles. They rode the planet's jet streams, using natural weather patterns to mask their approach as they descended toward the vast Endurance Elect facility that sprawled across the northern polar region. "I'm getting better readings on that anomalous energy signature," Harrington reported as they closed in. "Captain, I think they're trying to build another progenitor mind. The quantum resonance patterns match what we encountered at Abbott, but on a much larger scale." "All the more reason to crash their party," Caldwell replied, his voice hardening. "Prepare for package deployment, targeting coordinates uploaded to all fighters." The squadron entered a holding pattern 5 kilometers from the facility's perimeter, hovering just above a range of low hills that shielded them from direct observation. Wilson's fighter carefully positioned the disguised asteroid on a rocky outcropping. "Package in position," Wilson confirmed. "Commencing activation sequence." At his command, the seemingly inert asteroid began to transform. Sections of its surface shifted and separated, revealing the specialized infiltration craft hidden within. 20 Knights in advanced stealth armor emerged, their quantum spurs dampened to minimal output, their weapons primed for the mission ahead. "Ground team deployed," Wilson reported. "Operation Wooden Horse is a go." Caldwell opened a channel to the infiltration team's leader. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you have 30 minutes to place those charges at the designated coordinates. Remember, we want maximum disruption of their production capabilities." "Copy that, Captain," came the confident reply. "We'll be in and out before these calculators know what hit them." As the infiltration team moved toward the Endurance Elect facility, Caldwell directed his squadron to take up defensive positions. "All Mavericks, spread out and maintain overwatch. Be prepared to provide extraction support on my mark." The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness as Caldwell monitored both the infiltration team's progress and the massive space battle raging on the other side of the planet. The night fleet was putting on quite a show. drawing Endurance elect forces away from the production facility with feints and provocative maneuvers that seemed designed more to annoy than to destroy. Classic Texas distraction, Powers commented as they watched feeds from the space engagement. Marshal Santiago is having those machines chase their own tails. 23 minutes into the operation, Harrington's urgent voice broke the tense silence. "Captain, we've got a problem. The facility's internal security systems just went to high alert. I think they've detected our infiltration team." Caldwell's mind raced through contingencies. "Rodriguez, status report." "We've been spotted, Captain," came the tense reply, punctuated by the sound of weapons fire. "But we've already placed 16 of the 20 charges. We can still complete the mission." "Negative, Lieutenant," Caldwell decided immediately. "Place the remaining charges wherever you can and get out of there. Mavericks, prepare for emergency extraction." "Sir, the charges won't be optimally positioned," Rodriguez protested. "The disruption effect will be good enough," Caldwell interrupted. "I'm not losing nights over a few percentage points of efficiency. Set the timers and move to extraction point Bravo." As the infiltration team fought their way back toward the extraction zone, Endurance Select response units began to converge on their position. Combat frames poured from the facility in perfect formation, their advanced targeting systems scanning for the intruders. "They've deployed at least 200 elite frames," Hawkins reported, monitoring the tactical feed. "And more are coming. Rodriguez and his team are going to be overrun before they reach the extraction point." Caldwell made his decision in an instant. "New plan. Mavericks, form up on me. We're going in hot." "You want to engage directly?" Powers asked, though his fighter was already moving into position. "Those are our people down there," Caldwell replied simply. "Besides, we've never been ones for the subtle approach anyway." With that, he pushed his fighter into a steep dive, quantum drives flaring to full power as he abandoned all pretense of stealth. The rest of the squadron followed without hesitation, their formation spreading into an attack pattern that had become infamous among Endurance Electric tactical databases, the San Jacinto swoop. "Weapons free!" Caldwell ordered as they closed on the advancing combat frames. "Let's give these machines something new to calculate." The Maverick fighters opened fire simultaneously, their quantum disruption cannons sending pulses of blue energy into the perfectly ordered ranks of Endurance Elect units. Where the disruption fields touched, machine coordination faltered and broke. The combat frames, programmed to function as part of a synchronized whole, suddenly found themselves unable to maintain tactical coherence. "Rodriguez, change of plans," Caldwell transmitted as his fighters strafed a line of disoriented combat frames. "Head for extraction point Charlie. We'll keep them busy." The Mavericks danced through the Endurance Elect formations, their seemingly chaotic movements following patterns no machine algorithm could predict. Where conventional pilots might have executed standard evasive maneuvers, the Knights flew with the same unpredictable flair that had made Texas legendary long before humanity reached the stars. "They're adapting," Harrington warned as the combat frames began to adjust their tactics, spreading out to reduce the effectiveness of the disruption fields. "Calculating new firing solutions based on our attack patterns." "Then let's give them something new to think about," Caldwell replied. "Wilson, remember that maneuver we discussed? The one Marshal Santiago said would get us court-martialed if we ever attempted it?" "The quantum rodeo?" Wilson asked, his voice brightening with anticipation. "Yes, sir, I surely do. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1... Mark!" 6 of the Maverick fighters suddenly cut their conventional drives and activated their quantum phase systems at full capacity. Instead of the careful, controlled quantum signatures used for normal space travel, they generated wild, unpredictable energy patterns that rippled outward in expanding waves. The effect on the Endurance Elect combat frames was immediate and devastating. Their networked intelligence, attempting to calculate responses to these impossible energy patterns, suffered cascading processing failures. Entire squadrons of machines froze in place or executed random, uncoordinated movements as their tactical cores struggled to reboot. "Infiltration team is approaching extraction point Charlie," Hawkins reported. "Charges are set to detonate in 3 minutes. All Mavericks form up and prepare for atmospheric exit," Caldwell ordered. Let's not overstay our welcome. As the fighters regrouped and moved to rendezvous with the infiltration team, Harrington's sensors detected a new threat. Captain, the facility's main defense system is coming online, some kind of quantum artillery, bigger than anything we've encountered before. On cue, the horizon lit up with ominous energy as massive cannons emerged from the Endurance Elect facility. They oriented toward the Maverick squadron with the deliberate precision that characterized all machine weaponry. "Evasive maneuvers!" Caldwell shouted as the first salvo of quantum energy lanced toward them. "Scatter pattern Alamo!" The Mavericks broke formation just as intense beams of coherent quantum energy sliced through the space they had occupied moments before. Even near misses sent disruption waves through their fighters' systems, causing momentary power fluctuations. "That's no ordinary defense system," Powers observed grimly as they regrouped behind a ridge. "Those are capital ship-grade weapons. They're not just trying to drive us off, they're trying to obliterate us completely." "They're scared," Caldwell realized. "Whatever they're building down there, they're willing to commit everything to protect it." The infiltration team's signal appeared on their tactical display, moving rapidly toward Extraction Point Charlie. But between them and the Mavericks stood a growing force of Endurance Elect combat frames, and behind those, the massive quantum artillery preparing for another barrage. "We need to buy them more time," Caldwell decided. "Harrington, how much longer until those charges detonate?" 2 minutes, 17 seconds. "Not soon enough," Caldwell muttered. Then, his voice firming with resolution, "New plan. I'm going to draw their fire. The rest of you, form up on Wilson and get to the extraction point. Get our people off this rock." "Captain," Powers began to protest. "That's an order, Lieutenant," Caldwell cut him off. "Someone needs to keep those artillery pieces busy, and I've always been the best at getting attention." Before anyone could argue further, Caldwell sent his Maverick into a steep climb. Quantum drives flaring at maximum output. His trajectory took him directly over the Endurance Elect facility, a provocative move guaranteed to draw their focus. It worked. The massive quantum cannons tracked his fighter, their energy signatures building toward another devastating volley. The combat frames below altered their patterns, many breaking off their advance toward the infiltration team to target this new, more immediate threat. "Y'all better be moving," Caldwell transmitted as he executed a series of tight maneuvers that would have torn apart any conventional fighter. His quantum spurs interfaced directly with the Maverick's systems, allowing him to push the craft beyond its designed limitations. The first artillery blast came closer than he'd anticipated, the quantum disruption wave catching his fighter's starboard wing. Warning lights flashed across his console as systems temporarily failed and restored. "Captain, your quantum signature is destabilizing," Harrington warned. "Those hits are adding up. One direct strike and—" "I'm well aware of the math, Corporal," Caldwell replied, forcing lightness into his tone as he narrowly avoided another blast. "Just make sure everyone gets clear before this place lights up like the San Antonio Fiesta." As he continued his deadly dance with the Endurance Elect weapons, Caldwell caught glimpses of the other Mavericks forming a protective cordon around the extraction point. The infiltration team had almost reached safety. "For a minute to detonation," Harrington updated. Caldwell executed a particularly daring dive between two artillery emplacements, causing them to track each other momentarily before their safety protocols prevented friendly fire. The maneuver bought him precious seconds, but his fighter was accumulating damage with each near miss. "All personnel aboard," Wilson finally reported. "Mavericks are preparing for atmospheric exit." "Get going," Caldwell ordered, pulling his fighter into a climb that sent warning signals screaming through his neural interface. "I'll be right behind you." It wasn't entirely a lie. He fully intended to follow, if his increasingly damaged fighter could manage it. The quantum disruption effects were playing havoc with his systems, and the arterial flow from the gash in his left arm was making the controls slippery. 30 seconds to detonation," came Harrington's voice. "Captain, we're not leaving without you." Caldwell allowed himself a smile beneath his helmet. Stubborn to the end. True Texas Knights. "All units execute immediate atmospheric exit," he ordered, putting every ounce of command authority into his voice. That's a direct order. I'll rendezvous in orbit. There was a moment of silence, then Wilson's reluctant acknowledgement. Copy that, Captain. Don't be late for the barbecue. Caldwell watched as the Maverick squadron accelerated upward, quickly becoming pinpoints of light against PV-4's dark sky. The Endurance Elect artillery tracked them briefly before reorienting toward him, still the most immediate threat. Just you and me now, he muttered to the machine intelligence controlling the weapons. Let's see if you can calculate this. With his quantum spurs flaring bright blue despite the dampening effect of his injuries, Caldwell pushed his fighter into a maneuver that no tactical computer would consider viable. A direct course toward the largest of the quantum cannons, followed by a last-second vertical climb that would either clear the massive weapon or end with his fighter as a smoking crater. His neural interface fed him trajectory data that made his stomach sink. The damage to his fighter was too extensive. He wasn't going to make it. But if he could keep the artillery focused on him for just 15 more seconds... Captain! Power's voice broke through his concentration. Brake left, now! Instinct took over before conscious thought. Caldwell wrenched his fighter into a hard left turn just as a barrage of quantum torpedoes streaked past him, slamming into the artillery emplacement he'd been approaching. The massive cannon erupted in a spectacular explosion as its quantum core destabilized. Through the chaos of his damaged sensors, Caldwell detected a new signature, larger than a Maverick, moving with deliberate purpose through the atmosphere. Thought you could have all the fun without me? Came a familiar drawl as a Longhorn-class dropship descended through the clouds, its weapons ports glowing with ready energy. Marshal Santiago would have my spurs if I let her favorite troublemaker get vaporized. Wilson? Caldwell managed, his voice tight with pain and surprise. I ordered you to... Must have been some interference in the transmission, sir, Wilson replied innocently. Now, if you don't mind, we've got about 10 seconds before this whole place goes up. Think you can limp that fighter into my cargo bay, or do I need to come get you? Despite everything, Caldwell laughed. I think I can manage one more bit of fancy flying. True to his word, he coaxed his damaged Maverick into a trajectory that lined up with the Longhorn's open cargo bay. The landing was more controlled crash than textbook touchdown, but his fighter skidded to a halt inside the dropship with seconds to spare. Cargo secured, Wilson announced. Hold on to your Stetsons, folks. This is going to be a sporty exit. The Longhorn's quantum drives engaged at full power, pushing the craft upward at a rate that strained its structural integrity. Behind them, the quantum disruption charges reached their detonation sequence. The first explosion might have been mistaken for a small tactical nuclear device. The second, third, and subsequent detonations, building on each other's quantum resonance, created a cascading effect that far exceeded the Knight's calculations. The Endurance Elect facility didn't just suffer damage. It was erased from existence, the quantum disruption spreading outward to consume everything within a 10-kilometer radius. From the relative safety of orbit, the Night Squadron watched as a blue-white fireball consumed the northern pole of Proxima Meridian 4. The quantum sensors on their fighters registered energy readings that temporarily overwhelmed their detection capability. That's significantly more explosive than projected, Harrington noted with professional understatement. Whatever they were building down there must have been heavily quantum charged already. In the Longhorn's cockpit, Caldwell allowed the medical system to seal his wound as he studied the tactical display. The main night fleet, having completed their diversionary role, was already moving to secure orbital control of the planet. Endurance Elect forces, suddenly bereft of central coordination, were falling into disarray across the system. Mission accomplished, I'd say, Wilson observed from the pilot's seat. Though your definition of "I'll be right behind you" leaves something to be desired, Captain. Caldwell smiled tiredly. Next time I'll be more specific about the timeline. His expression sobered as he considered what they'd just witnessed. Something tells me we just prevented a lot more than a new production facility. The way those charges reacted, Harrington was right. They were trying to build something big down there. Well, whatever it was, it's Texas barbecue now, Wilson replied, guiding the Longhorn toward the rendezvous point where the Buckies awaited. Speaking of which, I hear the mess hall is serving genuine synthetic brisket tonight, assuming we don't get court-martialed for disobeying orders, that is. I think I can convince Marshal Santiago to overlook that particular infraction, Caldwell said, his quantum spurs humming softly as his strength returned. Better all, we just dealt the Endurance Elect what might be their final defeat in this sector. As the Longhorn approached the massive form of the Buckeyes, its hull scarred but proud after leading another successful offensive, Caldwell reflected on how far they'd come. What had begun as a desperate defense of a single colony had evolved into a campaign that might well have secured peace for dozens of worlds. The Texas Knights had taken the offensive, carried the fight into enemy territory, and emerged victorious. The quantum disruption explosion had transformed the northern pole of Proxima Viridian 4 into an alien landscape. What had once been an immense Endurance Elect facility was now a vast crater ringed by strange metallic formations that caught the light of the system's distant sun, casting eerie blue shadows across the devastated terrain. Captain Jordan Caldwell's Longhorn dropship descended through wisps of lingering atmospheric disturbance, its sensors constantly scanning for any signs of residual Endurance Elect activity. 3 days had passed since their decisive strike against the Machine Intelligence's secret project, and Knight Command had wasted no time dispatching scientific teams to assess both the damage and the unusual readings emanating from the impact zone. Approaching Landing Zone Alpha, Wilson announced from the pilot's seat, his usual drawl tempered by professional focus. Sensors show stable ground at the crater's northwest quadrant. Minimal quantum disruption fields should be safe enough to set down. Define minimal quantum disruption, Powers asked from his station, where he monitored the portable defense grid they'd brought along. The Texas Knights hadn't survived this long by taking unnecessary chances, especially in what had been enemy territory mere days ago. By Texas Knights standards, Wilson chuckled. Nothing that'll melt your spurs or scramble your neural interface. Probably. Harrington, ever the precise one, consulted his more specialized equipment. The quantum resonance is actually fascinating. The disruption charge catalyzed with the indigenous materials to create a molecular restructuring rather than pure destruction. The entire crater bed is essentially a new form of quantum reactive material we've never encountered before. Which is why we're here, Caldwell reminded them, checking the charge on his plasma-tipped blade one final time before landing. Knight Command wants samples, analysis, and a full tactical assessment. What exactly were the Endurance Elect building, and what can we learn from what's left of it? The Longhorn touched down with a gentle shudder, its landing struts adjusting automatically to the uneven surface. Through the viewports, the landscape appeared almost beautiful in its alien devastation. Shattered machinery and robotic components fused with newly formed metallic structures that pulsed with faint inner light. Atmospheric analysis complete, Hawkins reported. Breathable but not pleasant. High particulate count, traces of quantum radiation within acceptable limits. Recommend Level 2 exposure protocols, Caldwell nodded. Full armor, limited visor exposure. We've got 4 hours before the main scientific team arrives. Let's make them count. Marshal Gabriela Santiago's voice cut in over the comm, her tone carrying the easy authority that had made her one of the most respected leaders in the Night Corps. Night actual to ground team. My shuttle will be joining you in approximately 20 minutes. Save the interesting bits for me. Copy that, Marshal, Caldwell replied, suppressing a smile. Santiago had never been one to miss out on the exploration phase of any operation. We'll try not to solve all the mysteries before you arrive. As the Knights prepared to disembark, Lieutenant Rodriguez's team, the infiltration specialists who had placed the charges that destroyed the facility, signaled their approach from the secondary landing zone 2 kilometers east. Their Mustang transport kicked up clouds of dark dust as it settled onto the scorched plain. Ground Team 2 in position, Captain, Rodriguez reported. And you're going to want to see this. We've found something unusual. The Knights deployed in standard exploration formation. Caldwell and Powers taking point, Wilson and Harrington focusing on sample collection, and Hawkins establishing the portable sensor array that would map the entire crater and relay data back to the orbiting Buck-e's. The terrain crunched beneath their boots, the transformed surface sometimes giving way to reveal deeper layers of fused material. Harrington paused every few meters to collect samples, his specialized equipment humming as it analyzed the quantum properties of the alien. "These readings are off the charts," he murmured, holding up a fist-sized chunk of dark metal that pulsed with inner blue light. "The quantum reactivity is an order of magnitude higher than anything we've encountered outside of Quantum Haven itself." Caldwell whistled softly. Quantum Haven was the legendary source of the materials used in Knight quantum spurs and weapons, a closely guarded location known only to the highest echelons of Texas Command, if these materials were comparable. "Package and catalog everything," he ordered. "Knight Command will want extensive testing." They made their way toward Rodriguez's position, passing through what must have been the central processing core of the Endurance Elect facility. Here the destruction was most complete and most transformed. Massive columns of what appeared to be some sort of quantum-fused alloy rose like strange monuments, their structures incorporating fragments of machine technology that somehow continued to function despite being merged into the metallic matrix. "It's almost like the facility was repurposed rather than destroyed," Powers observed. Running a scanner over one of the columns, the quantum disruption charge didn't just break things down. It rebuilt them into something new. Something neither human nor machine, Hawkins added, his voice thoughtful. A third state entirely. They found Rodriguez and his team gathered around what appeared to be a depression in the ground filled with a dark viscous substance that occasionally rippled with threads of blue energy. The infiltration specialist's armor showed signs of recent combat, scorch marks and impact dents that hadn't been there when they'd deployed 3 days earlier. "Ran into trouble?" Caldwell asked by way of greeting, noting the damage. Rodriguez nodded, his helmet tilting toward the strange depression. Found a pocket of Endurance Elect survivors about a kilometer east, combat frames fused with the strange metal formations but still operational. Limited mobility, but their weapons systems worked just fine. He gestured to a specialist whose arm armor had been partially melted. "Woods found that out the hard way." "Any still active in this area?" Powers asked, his Thunderbird cannon humming as he swept it across their surroundings. "None that we could detect, but that doesn't mean much. These altered materials play havoc with our sensors." Rodriguez turned back to the depression. "But that's not what I called you to see. Our preliminary scans show this entire area is rich with a new type of quantum reactive metal. The explosion didn't just destroy the facility, it transformed the very bedrock." Harrington was already running his scanner over the area, his excitement evident even through his professional demeanor. "He's right. This material appears to have quantum absorption properties, unlike anything in our database. If we could refine it, the implications for research are staggering," Caldwell finished for him. "If we could transport some of this back to the labs." "That's exactly what Knight Command is thinking," came Santiago's voice as the Marshal approached from behind, her armor gleaming in the strange light of the crater. A squad of Knight Guards flanked her, along with several science officers in specialized protective gear. "Which is why I brought the eggheads along earlier than planned." Santiago moved with her characteristic confidence, quantum spurs leaving deeper blue trails than most Knights could generate. She had been a legend in the Corps even before the Abbott Colony battle, but her leadership during the subsequent offensive had elevated her to near mythical status among both Knights and civilians. "Marshal," Caldwell greeted her with a respectful nod. "You're just in time for the interesting part." "So I see," she replied, studying the area around them. "Rodriguez, have your team establish a security perimeter. I want these science officers to have uninterrupted access to collect samples." As Rodriguez's team moved to comply, Santiago gestured for Caldwell and his knights to join her a short distance away. Her voice took on a more informal tone once they were out of earshot of the science team. "What we've found here goes beyond tactical advantage, Captain. Knight Command's preliminary analysis suggests these materials could revolutionize our quantum technology. More powerful spurs, more efficient drives, weapons with twice the disruption field for half the energy input. Harrington held up one of the samples he'd collected. The quantum resonance is unlike anything in our database. It's as if the disruption charge catalyzed with the materials the Endurance Elect were using and created something entirely new. And potentially valuable beyond calculation, Santiago added. Which brings me to the second part of my news. Supreme Commander Blackwell has authorized full-scale mining operations to begin within the week. This entire crater is being designated as a strategic resource zone under Texas Knight control. The implications weren't lost on any of them. Strategic resource zones were rare and immensely profitable for those involved in their discovery and development. Knight Command has also authorized a discovery bonus, Santiago continued, a smile evident in her voice despite her helmet's opacity. Is the teams responsible for both identifying and neutralizing this Endurance Elect facility? You'll all receive a percentage of the mining operations proceeds in perpetuity. Congratulations, gentlemen, you've just become very wealthy knights. The news took a moment to sink in. The Texas Knights were well compensated for their service, but discovery rights to a strategic resource zone meant financial security on a different scale entirely. Well, I'll be damned, Wilson finally said, breaking the stunned silence. Mama Wilson always said I'd strike it rich someday. She just thought it'd be with my handsome face and charming personality, not by blowing up a bunch of robots. That broke the tension, drawing laughter from the group. Even Santiago joined in, her usual formality temporarily set aside in the face of their collective good fortune. I think this calls for a small celebration, she declared, reaching into a compartment on her armor and withdrawing a flask emblazoned with the Lone Star emblem. A proper Texas tradition, a toast to success. Rodriguez, who had returned from organizing the perimeter, approached just as Santiago was producing the flask. Is that what I think it is, Marshal? Genuine earth whiskey, she confirmed. From my personal reserve. Been saving it for a special occasion, and striking quantum gold certainly qualifies. The impromptu celebration had a surreal quality against the backdrop of the devastated crater. Santiago removed her helmet first, her features finally visible. Sharp eyes that missed nothing, dark hair cropped short for comfort under armor, and a network of fine scars along her jaw from a long-ago encounter with collector forces. To the Texas Knights, she proposed, taking the first ceremonial sip before passing the flask to Rodriguez. And to making the galaxy safe for humans, one exploded robot facility at a time. Rodriguez followed suit, removing his own helmet to reveal a grinning face, still youthful despite years of combat experience. To unexpected bonuses and quantum treasure, he added, drinking deeply before offering the flask to Caldwell. Perhaps it was the euphoria of discovery, or the natural relaxation that follows intense operations. Perhaps it was simply the human need to celebrate victory with the age-old ritual of shared drink. Whatever the reason, the Knights let their guard down for just a moment, Santiago and Rodriguez with helmets removed, the others temporarily distracted by the prospect of unprecedented riches. None of them noticed the subtle shift in one of the twisted metal formations 30 meters to their right, the way the fused structures realigned themselves with deliberate purpose. None of them registered the faint power signature that briefly flared and then damped down to near undetectable levels. None of them saw death approaching until it was too late. The attack came with the unnatural speed that characterized all Endurance Elect combat frames. One moment the formation was just another twisted column of metal and machine parts, the next it had launched itself toward the unprotected humans with lethal precision. Hawkins spotted it first, his warning shout cutting through the celebratory atmosphere. Contact right, combat frame active! But his warning came too late for Santiago and Rodriguez. The machine, half melted metal, half original Endurance Elect components, moved with terrifying speed despite its damaged state. Its right arm had been transformed into a jagged blade that glowed with the same blue energy as the surrounding formations. Santiago's years of combat experience allowed her to begin turning toward the threat, her hand dropping to her sidearm. Rodriguez, slightly slower, had only started to react when the transformed machine struck. The blade passed through Santiago's unprotected neck with horrific efficiency, continuing its arc to pierce Rodriguez's chest before either could complete their defensive movements. Both knights collapsed as the machine withdrew its weapon, their blood appearing almost black against the scorched earth of the crater floor. The next seconds passed in a blur of quantum fire and coordinated knight response. Power's Thunderbird cannon roared to life, the heavy weapon's disruption field tearing through the machine's torso. Caldwell's plasma-tipped blade swept in a practiced arc that separated the machine's head from its shoulders. Wilson and Harrington targeted additional twisted formations that were beginning to shift and move, their weapons reducing the nascent threats to scattered fragments. Hawkins rushed to the fallen knights, medical kit already in hand, but one glance told him what they all knew. The precision of the strike, the unprotected targets. Santiago and Rodriguez had been killed instantly, without even the chance to register what had happened. As the echoes of weapons fire faded, Caldwell knelt beside Santiago's body, his quantum spurs leaving deeper, angrier trails of blue fire across the scorched ground. The marshal's eyes remained open, fixed on the alien sky of a world she had helped secure for humanity. A world that had claimed her in return. "Secure the area," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled rage and grief. "Full sensor sweep, maximum sensitivity. If there's so much as a functioning circuit within 5 kilometers, I want it found and neutralized." The knights moved with grim efficiency, their earlier celebration forgotten. The science officers huddled together under the protection of the remaining security team, their excitement at the discovery replaced by the stark reminder of where they were and what had happened here. Harrington approached after completing his scan, his normally analytical voice subdued. "The explosion transformed the Endurance Elect components, Captain. It created hybrid entities that retain combat capabilities but have completely novel quantum signatures. Our standard detection protocols weren't calibrated for them." "Recalibrate," Caldwell ordered, rising to his feet. "And signal the Buck-E's. I want a full night company on the ground within the hour. Nothing moves in this crater without our permission, not even a speck of dust." As the Knights established a defensive perimeter around the fallen, Caldwell contacted Knight Command directly, his quantum spurs interfacing with the communication array. Supreme Commander Blackwell's response was immediate and unequivocal. The mining operation would proceed as planned, but with extreme security protocols. The discovery was too valuable to abandon, even in the face of this tragedy. The quantum-rich materials of Proxima Viridian 4 would indeed transform Texas Knight technology, just as Santiago had predicted. Future generations of Knights would wield weapons and wear armor enhanced by the material discovered in this crater. The financial benefits would flow to the survivors and to the families of Santiago and Rodriguez, as promised. But as Caldwell watched Knight medics prepare the bodies of their fallen comrades for transport, he knew that no amount of quantum metal could ever truly compensate for their loss. The real price of victory had been paid not in quantum disruption charges or tactical maneuvers, but in the blood of Knights who had dared to celebrate too soon. Later, as the Buck-E's carried them back toward Texas space, Caldwell stood in the ship's memorial chamber where the bodies of Santiago and Rodriguez lay in state, covered with the Lone Star flag. His team joined him in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "The Marshal would have hated all this ceremony," Wilson finally said, his usual humor subdued but not entirely absent. "She always said she wanted to go out fighting, not be fussed over afterward." "She did go out fighting," Powers replied quietly. "We all knew the risks when we took the offensive into Endurance Elect territory. They may be on the run, but they're not defeated, not entirely." Caldwell nodded, his quantum spurs leaving faint trails of blue fire across the deck plating, "Which is why we'll continue the mission. We'll secure this resource, develop it, and use it to make sure no more Knights fall to machine intelligence." He looked at each member of his team in turn. That's what they would have wanted. As they stood vigil over their fallen comrades, Caldwell reflected on the bitter irony of their discovery. The quantum-rich materials of Proxima Viridian 4 would indeed make the Knights wealthier and their technology more formidable. But the true value and cost of the find had been measured not in credits or tactical advantage, but in the lives of those who had fought to secure it. Some victories came with hidden prices. Some discoveries were paid for in blood. And some wealth, no matter how immense, was ultimately fool's gold compared to the comrades lost in its acquisition. The memorial service for Marshal Gabriela Santiago and Lieutenant Eduardo Rodriguez was held beneath the vast dome of the Knights Chapel on New Dallas. Captain Jordan Caldwell stood with his team as the ceremonial guard folded the Lone Star flags that had draped the caskets, presenting them with solemn precision to the waiting family members. Santiago's teenage son accepted his mother's flag with a stoic expression that reminded Caldwell painfully of the Marshal herself. Rodriguez's father, a retired knight, received his son's flag with tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. But it was what came next that embodied the deepest traditions of the Texas Knights. Supreme Commander Blackwell stepped forward, his quantum spurs leaving faint blue traces across the chapel's polished floor. In his hands he carried Santiago's ceremonial sword, the plasma-tipped blade that had ended countless enemies of humanity. Beside him, a senior knight held Rodriguez's modified Vaquero sidearm, the distinctive quantum pistol that had become the lieutenant's signature weapon. "Since the founding of the Texas Knights," Blackwell intoned, his hill country drawl carrying easily through the vast space, "we have understood that our strength lies not just in the warriors who stand before our enemies, but in the generations who will follow. Our quantum spurs may leave traces in the void, but our truest legacy is found in those who walk our paths after we have fallen." He approached Santiago's son, presenting the sword with formal precision. "Miguel Santiago, your mother's blade has tasted the metallic blood of our enemies across 17 star systems. It carries within its quantum matrix the encoded experiences of her battles, her triumphs, her indomitable spirit. When you are of age, should you choose to follow in her footsteps, this blade will remember her hands even as it serves in yours." The young man accepted the weapon, holding it with a mixture of reverence and determination that suggested the Corps would indeed see another Santiago among its ranks in time. Similar scenes played out across the chapel as the Knights' weapons, armor, and quantum spurs were presented to family members. These weren't merely keepsakes or mementos. Each piece of Knight equipment contained quantum matrices encoded with the experiences of those who had wielded them. When the next generation of Santiago and Rodriguez Knights took up these arms, the weapons would guide their new wielders with the accumulated wisdom of those who had come before. Caldwell understood the profound importance of the tradition. His own quantum spurs had once belonged to his grandfather, their matrices carrying generations of Knight experience that had saved his life countless times. The continuity of knight to knight, parent to child, mentor to student, it was what made the Texas Knights more than merely soldiers. It made them a legacy. As the solemn ceremony concluded, Caldwell's neural interface pinged with a priority alert from Knight Command. The notification's timing seemed almost disrespectful, but Caldwell knew that even in death, Santiago and Rodriguez would have put the mission first. With a subtle gesture, he acknowledged the alert, noting that his team had received identical notifications. They slipped away from the chapel as the reception began, gathering in a small anteroom where a secure quantum comlink had been established. The holographic projection of Admiral Hayes' Night Fleet intelligence materialized before them. "Captain Caldwell," Hayes began without preamble, "I apologize for the timing, but we've detected something that can't wait." "We understand, Admiral," Caldwell replied. "How can we help?" Hayes manipulated unseen controls, and the hologram shifted to display a star chart of a region far beyond the normal patrol routes of the Texas Knights. Long-range quantum sensors have detected unusual transmission patterns originating from this sector. The signals are heavily encrypted, but what we've decrypted suggests they're Endurance Elect in origin. Yet, unlike any Endurance Elect communications we've previously encountered. Harrington stepped closer, studying the data scrolling alongside the star chart. These are foundational command protocols, he observed, his analytical mind quickly processing the information. Master-level directives, not the tactical communications we typically intercept. Precisely, Hayes confirmed. We believe we've located something unprecedented, possibly a central command node for the entire Endurance Elect network in this quadrant. Maybe even something more significant. You want us to investigate? Caldwell stated. It wasn't a question. The Buckeyes is being prepped as we speak, Hayes replied. Your team's experience with the Endurance Elect makes you uniquely qualified. Plus, he hesitated briefly, Marshal Santiago was slated to lead this mission. It seems fitting that her last combat team should see it through. Caldwell felt a mixture of grief and determination settle in his chest. We'll honor her by completing the mission, sir. One more thing, Hayes added. This operation is classified beyond top secret. The coordinates place this signal source well outside recognized Endurance Elect territory. In fact, it's in what we believe to be empty space. If there's a major Endurance Elect facility operating that far off our strategic maps, then everything we thought we knew about their deployment patterns is wrong, Powers finished. Precisely. You'll deploy in 12 hours. Full details will be provided aboard the Buckeyes. Good hunting, knights. As Hayes's hologram faded, the team exchanged glances that needed no verbal accompaniment. They were being sent into completely unknown territory, pursuing signals that suggested something far more significant than just another Endurance Elect outpost. Well, Wilson finally said, breaking the silence, at least we won't have to worry about dress uniforms for a while. The weak joke earned half-hearted smiles, but Caldwell was grateful for the attempt to lighten the mood. 12 hours, gentlemen. Get your affairs in order. Something tells me this won't be a short deployment. The void between star systems had never seemed quite so vast or empty. The Buckeyes traveled through quantum-folded space, its massive engines bending reality in ways that would have made pre-space physicists weep with confusion. Yet even at quantum-enhanced velocities, reaching their destination required 9 days of travel. 9 days during which Caldwell and his team pored over the limited intelligence available, prepared their equipment, and tried not to dwell on the empty spaces left by Santiago and Rodriguez. Approaching designated coordinates, announced Commander Jenkins from his position on the bridge. The Buckeyes' executive officer had proven his worth a dozen times over during their campaign against the Endurance Elect, earning the respect of even the most tradition-bound Texas knights. Quantum drives disengaging in 3, 2, 1. Reality reasserted itself around the massive carrier as it dropped out of quantum-folded space. The viewscreen adjusted automatically to compensate for the lack of significant light sources in this empty region, enhancing the faint illumination from distant stars. Initial sensor sweep shows nothing, Hawkins reported, frowning at his readouts. No planetary bodies, no significant asteroid fields, no obvious artificial structures. But the signals definitely originated from this location? Caldwell asked, moving to stand beside Hawkins at the sensor station. Confirmed, Captain. Our quantum receivers are still detecting the transmissions, stronger now that we're at the source, but there's nothing here to be transmitting them, Harrington finished, joining them at the station. At least nothing our sensors can detect. Caldwell considered this for a moment. Expand the sensor range, maximum sensitivity full spectrum analysis, and deploy reconnaissance drones in a standard search pattern. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, carrying out his orders without question. The Texas Knights might maintain their distinctive traditions and aesthetics, but their operational professionalism was unmatched in human space. Reconnaissance drones away, Wilson reported from the tactical station. Search pattern Alamo, maximum dispersal, data feeds operational. Minutes ticked by as the drones extended the Buckeyes' sensory reach, searching the seemingly empty void for anything that might explain the mysterious transmissions. Caldwell was about to order a more specialized scan when Harrington suddenly straightened, his attention fixed on a particular readout. "Captain, I'm detecting quantum phase fluctuations approximately 30,000 kilometers to starboard. Very subtle, almost like background radiation, but with a distinct pattern." "Similar to cloaking technology?" Caldwell asked, immediately alert. "Not exactly. It's more like reality itself is slightly out of alignment in that region, as if something is partially phased into an adjacent quantum state." Caldwell considered this information. The Endurance Elect were known to experiment with quantum technologies that pushed the boundaries of conventional physics, but this sounded like something beyond even their established capabilities. "Take us closer," he ordered. "Maintain defensive readiness. All Knights prepare for potential deployment." The Buckies moved with surprising grace for its size, closing the distance to the anomalous readings while its crew prepared for whatever they might discover. As they approached, Harrington's sensors began to provide more detailed information. "The quantum displacement is massive," he reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Whatever's generating it has to be considerable in size." "How considerable?" Powers asked from his station. Harrington looked up, his expression caught between awe and disbelief. "Based on these readings, at least the size of a small moon." A tense silence fell over the bridge as the implications sank in. An artificial structure the size of a small moon, hidden through quantum displacement in empty space, far from any recognized Endurance Elect territory. "Reconnaissance Drone 7 is approaching the anomaly's perimeter," Wilson announced. "Visual feed coming online now." The main view screen shifted to display the drone's perspective. At first it showed only empty space, stars glittering in the distance. Then, almost imperceptibly, the image began to distort around the edges. The distortion spread inward, like reality itself being peeled away to reveal something beneath. And what lay beneath took Caldwell's breath away. A structure of impossible scale gradually materialized on the screen. Not a moon, as Harrington had estimated, but something even more massive. A construct that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Its surface was a complex latticework of metal and machinery, with vast sections that appeared to be in different phases of completion or expansion. Massive energy conduits snaked across its exterior like veins on some mechanical leviathan. Docking ports large enough to accommodate capital ships dotted its perimeter, while what appeared to be defensive arrays clustered around key sections. "Mother of mercy," Wilson breathed. "What are we looking at?" Harrington's fingers danced across his console as he analyzed the incoming data. It's a factory," he finally said, disbelief evident in his voice. "The largest manufacturing facility I've ever seen. Those structures along the equatorial region, they're assembly lines designed for mass production on an industrial scale." "Assembly lines for what?" Jenkins asked, though Caldwell suspected they all knew the answer. "Combat frames," Harrington confirmed. "Endurance Elect combat frames, carrier vessels, support craft, everything we've been fighting. But the scale, this facility could produce millions of units." Caldwell stared at the massive structure, trying to comprehend its implications. "This isn't just a factory," he said slowly. "This is the factory. The source of the Endurance Elect forces throughout this entire sector, maybe even beyond." Powers leaned forward, studying the structure with professional assessment. "Look at those sections near what I'm assuming is the core. The architecture is different, older. This facility has been expanded over time, built upon like geological layers." "How old do you think the oldest sections are?" Caldwell asked. Powers shook his head. "Hard to say without closer examination, but based on the degradation patterns visible on some of those original structures, centuries at minimum, possibly longer." The revelation hung in the air like a physical weight. The Endurance Elect hadn't just been operating in this sector for decades, as Knight intelligence had believed. They had been here for centuries, steadily building their forces from this hidden forge. "Drone 7 is being scanned," Wilson suddenly reported, tension evident in his voice. "Multiple targeting systems activating across the facility's surface. They know we're here." "Recall the drone," Caldwell ordered. All hands to battle stations, prepare night squadrons for immediate deployment. As alarm klaxons echoed through the Buck EZ, Caldwell made a decision. Open a secure quantum channel to Night Command, Priority Alpha. They need to see what we've found. While the communications officer worked to establish the connection, Caldwell turned to his team. Gentlemen, I believe we've just discovered the heart of the Endurance Elect war machine, the forge where our enemy is born. And judging by those defensive arrays coming online, Powers noted grimly, they're not keen on visitors. The massive structure was indeed waking up, sensors detecting increasing energy signatures across its vast surface. Weapon emplacements that had been dormant began to glow with building power, while what appeared to be hangar bays started to open, disgorging squadrons of combat vessels. Night Command acknowledges transmission, the communications officer reported. They are ordering us to withdraw immediately. Full retreat, maximum quantum velocity. Caldwell blinked in surprise. Withdraw? Without engaging? Confirmed, sir. Supreme Commander Blackwell himself has countermanded our original orders. We are to return to Texas space with all possible speed. This information is deemed too valuable to risk in direct engagement. For a moment, Caldwell was tempted to protest. They had found the source of the Endurance Elect, the well from which all their enemies sprang. Every instinct as a knight urged him to attack, to strike at this vital target. But decades of military discipline prevailed. If Blackwell was ordering a retreat, he had good reason. Helm, plot a quantum fold course back to Texas space, he ordered. Tactical, deploy countermeasures to cover our withdrawal. As the Buckies began its retreat maneuvers, launching clouds of quantum disruption buoys to confuse pursuing vessels, Caldwell couldn't tear his eyes from the view screen. The massive factory, the forge of their enemy, grew smaller as they increased distance, but its image was burned into his mind. "We'll be back," he promised quietly, "with everything Texas can muster." The quantum fold jump back to Texas space took 9 days, just as their outbound journey had. But unlike the outbound trip, these days were filled with feverish activity as Caldwell and his team analyzed the data they'd gathered, preparing comprehensive reports for Night Command. When they finally arrived at Night Prime, the headquarters of the Texas Knights, they were met not just by Admiral Hayes, but by Supreme Commander Blackwell himself, along with the entire Night High Command. "Your discovery has changed everything," Blackwell told them as they gathered in the primary strategic planning chamber. The room's central holographic projector displayed a detailed image of the factory, compiled from their drone footage and sensor readings. "What you found isn't just an Endurance Elect manufacturing facility. According to our historical records and archaeological data, we believe it's the original source. The birthplace of all Endurance Elect forces in the galaxy." Harrington leaned forward, intrigued. "The birthplace? You mean—" "I mean," Blackwell continued, "that massive structure predates humanity's first contact with the Endurance Elect by at least 1,000 years. Our xenoarchaeologists believe it was constructed by whatever civilization created the Endurance Elect in the first place. A civilization that appears to have vanished from the historical record. The progenitors," Admiral Hayes added. "That's what we're calling them, for lack of a better term. They built the Endurance Elect as servants or workers or whatever, programmed them with self-replication capabilities, and then disappeared. The machines have been building themselves ever since, following core directives established millennia ago." Caldwell stared at the holographic representation of the factory. "And this is their central forge, the place where it all began and where it continues." "Precisely," Blackwell confirmed. "Which is why I ordered your withdrawal. This isn't a target we can hit with a single carrier or even a standard fleet. This is something that will require the combined might of not just the Texas Knights, but potentially every human military force in the sector." Powers frowned. "Are you suggesting an alliance? Beyond just Texas forces?" Blackwell's expression was grim but determined. "I'm suggesting that what you've discovered represents an existential threat to all humanity. The Endurance Elect aren't just random machine intelligences operating on outdated programming. They're the legacy of an ancient civilization, building and expanding for thousands of years. And now that you've found their central forge, they'll know we're aware of their origin point. They'll defend it with everything they have, Wilson concluded. More than that, Hayes added, our analysts believe they may accelerate their offensive operations throughout human space. If they perceive a direct threat to their source, their behavioral algorithms will prioritize eliminating that threat, meaning us, by any means necessary. Caldwell took a deep breath, processing the enormity of what they'd discovered and its implications. So what's our next move, sir? Blackwell straightened, his quantum spurs leaving deeper, more determined trails of blue fire across the chamber floor. Our next move, Captain, is to prepare for the greatest military campaign in human history. I've already contacted Earth Command, the Colonial Defense Force, even the frontier militias. Representatives will be arriving within the week. He gestured to the holographic factory, its immense scale dominating the chamber. What you've found isn't just a target, it's an opportunity. For the first time since contact with the Endurance Elect, we have a chance to strike at their heart, to end the machine threat not just for our generation, but for all generations to come. The Supreme Commander's gaze swept across Caldwell's team. The Buckies will be refitted and resupplied immediately. Your team will serve as our primary intelligence asset for the operation, given your first-hand observation of the target. I'm officially promoting you to Major effective immediately, with all the authority that entails. Caldwell felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, alongside the pride of recognition. Thank you, sir. We won't let you down. I know you won't, Blackwell replied, his expression softened slightly. Santiago and Rodriguez would be proud. They helped start this campaign, and now you'll help finish it. As the briefing continued, detailing the massive mobilization that would soon be underway, Caldwell found his thoughts turning to the memorial ceremony and the passing of weapons and armor to the next generation of knights. Santiago's son with his mother's sword. Rodriguez's father holding his son's quantum pistol. Those weapons would be used again, wielded by new knights carrying forward the legacy of those who had fallen. The quantum matrices within them would remember their previous wielders, would guide the hands of those who came after, and if Blackwell's grand campaign succeeded, if they managed to destroy the ancient forge that had been producing their enemies for millennia, perhaps those weapons would finally know peace, not just for a generation, but for all time. The Texas Knights had found the source of their enemy, the forge where the machine threat was born and perpetuated. Now they would bring to bear everything that they had to end the threat once and for all. It was time the Texans ensured that no future generations suffer a bot to live. This boat wasn't built to last, Captain Delbert Wall observed, running his hand along the bulkhead of the UNMS battering ram. It was built to die gloriously. Major Jordan Caldwell couldn't disagree. The battering ram was one of 50 penetrator-class vessels hastily constructed for Operation Blitzkrieg, ships designed with a single purpose, to pierce the outer hull of the Endurance Elect Forge and disgorge their complement of troops directly into the heart of the enemy. That's why they gave her to us, Captain, Caldwell replied, his quantum spurs humming softly against the deck plates. Glory's what Texas Knights do best. A career officer in the United Naval Marine Service, offered a tight smile. Though he commanded the battering ram, he had no illusions about who the brass considered the mission's true leaders. 4,000 troops, most of them standard infantry with minimal power armor. 200 melee Marines with their fancy vibroblades, and exactly 5 Texas Knights with their quantum spurs and cowboy hats. He shook his head. Command must really believe in you folks. Not in us specifically, Harrington corrected, looking up from his sensor readouts. In the intelligence we gathered, Major Caldwell's team is the only unit that's actually seen the forge firsthand, which is why we're on point for the primary thrust, Powers added, checking the charge on his Thunderbird cannon for the 4th time in an hour. The massive weapon had been enhanced with components forged from the quantum reactive metals discovered on Proxima Viridian 4, its disruption field now capable of affecting targets at twice the previous range. The battering ram's bridge fell silent as they contemplated the mission ahead. Operation Blitzkrieg represented the largest coordinated military action in human history. 300 warships from a dozen different human factions, 50 specialized penetrator vessels, and over 200,000 troops, all committed to a single, audacious assault on the forge that had birthed humanity's mechanical enemies. "Final approach in 90 minutes, Walls said, breaking the silence. "You should get your team ready, Major." Caldwell nodded and gestured for his knights to follow. As they made their way through the crowded corridors of the battering ram, they passed contingents of troops from across human space. United Naval Marine Service regulars in their utilitarian armor, colonial militia, volunteers with their mismatched gear but determined expressions, professional mercenaries from the frontier companies checking their specialized weapons. Most numerous were the unarmored infantry, ordinary soldiers volunteering from a dozen worlds, equipped with standard-issue pulse rifles and basic combat suits. They represented the majority of the invasion force not just on the battering ram but across the entire operation. "They're staring," Wilson murmured as they passed a group of colonial militia who had fallen silent at the sight of the knights. "Of course they are," Hawkins replied. "Most of them have only heard stories about Texas knights. We're practically myths to the outer colonies." Caldwell didn't comment, but he felt the weight of those stares. The distinctive armor of the Texas Knights, with its blend of frontier aesthetics and advanced technology, stood out sharply against the utilitarian gear of the regular forces. Their quantum spurs left visible trails of blue energy with each step, marking them as something different, something special. The melee Marines they passed offered more measured acknowledgments, professional nods or slight salutes. As the main branch from which the Texas Knights had evolved, the Marines maintained a complicated relationship with their more flamboyant cousins. They respected the Knights' combat prowess, while often chafing at their tendency to overshadow the Marines' own considerable skills. "Major Caldwell," a voice called from behind them, "a moment, please." Caldwell turned to see Colonel Davidson, commander of the melee Marine contingent aboard the battering ram. The colonel's armor bore the distinctive vibroblade insignia of the Marines, along with campaign markers from a dozen conflicts. "Colonel?" Caldwell acknowledged with a respectful nod. "What can I do for you?" Davidson gestured toward a side corridor away from the flow of troops. Once they had a measure of privacy, he spoke frankly. "My Marines will be following your team once we breach. I want to be clear on the chain of command." Caldwell understood the concern. The hasty assembly of Operation Blitzkrieg had left many command structures ambiguous. "Your Marines follow your orders, Colonel. My Knights follow mine. But we're all following the operation plan. Straight to the central control node, no heroics, no heroics." Davidson studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Because I've heard stories about Texas Knights and their creative interpretations of battle plans." "Only when the situation calls for improvisation," Caldwell assured him. "We understand the stakes here. This isn't about glory or individual achievements. It's about ending the Endurance-elect threat once and for all." The colonel seemed satisfied with this answer. "Very well. We'll be ready when the hull breaches." He offered a crisp salute, then rejoined his Marines farther down the corridor. "He's worried we'll go off script," Powers observed once Davidson was out of earshot. "With good reason," Wilson added with a slight grin. "It's what we're known for." Caldwell shook his head. "Not this time. Operation Blitzkrieg isn't about Texas Knight showmanship. It's about overwhelming force applied with surgical precision." He checked his neural interface, noting the mission clock ticking down. "Let's get to the deployment bay. I want a final equipment check before we hit the breach point." The battering ram's main deployment bay was a study in controlled chaos. 4,000 troops arranged in neat formations, checking equipment, securing harnesses, and offering quiet prayers or personal rituals in preparation for combat. At the very front, directly behind the massive reinforced doors that would open directly into the Endurance Elect Forge, stood Caldwell's team. The 5 Texas Knights had positioned themselves at the tip of the spear, the first humans who would set foot inside the ancient facility that had spawned countless machine enemies. Behind them waited the melee Marines, their vibroblades humming with lethal energy, ready to expand the foothold the Knights would establish. 30 minutes to breach, announced the ship's AI, its voice steady and emotionless. All personnel secure for impact maneuvers. Caldwell performed a final check of his equipment. His plasma-tipped sword hung at his hip, its quantum matrix newly enhanced with components from Proxima Viridian 4. His sidearm, a heavily modified quantum pistol, was secured in its holster. His armor gleamed with recent upgrades, neural interfaces linking directly to his quantum spurs and providing real-time tactical data through his helmet's display. "Knights," he addressed his team on their private channel. "Whatever happens when those doors open, remember, we're not just fighting for Texas anymore. We're fighting for everyone who's ever lost someone to the Endurance Elect, for every world they've threatened, for every future they've tried to steal." "No pressure," Wilson quipped, though his voice lacked its usual light-hearted tone. "We've got this, Major," Powers assured him, his massive Thunderbird cannon primed and ready. "First in, strike hard, secure the breach, the rest will follow." "Operation Blitzkrieg commencing," the ship's AI announced. "All ships, execute attack pattern Thunderbolt. Penetrator vessels, begin your approach runs." Through their neural interfaces, the Knights could access limited external feeds, allowing them to witness the awesome spectacle unfolding outside the battering ram. 300 warships of various sizes and designs converged on the massive Endurance Elect Forge, only to encounter an unexpected obstacle. A defensive fleet of machine vessels had formed a protective cordon around the ancient facility. "Endurance Elect defensive fleet detected," Wall's voice came through the ship-wide comm. "At least 200 vessels of various classes. Command is ordering all ships to accelerate to breakthrough velocity. We need to punch through their line before they can coordinate their defense." The massive battle unfolded with staggering speed. Human warships engaged the Endurance Elect vessels in a desperate bid to create openings for the penetrator ships to slip through. Quantum torpedoes, plasma lances, and disruption beams crisscrossed the void, striking shields and hulls with devastating effect on both sides. "This wasn't in the plan," Harrington noted, monitoring the tactical feed through his neural interface. "The intel suggested the forge would be defended by fixed emplacements, not a mobile fleet." "They know what we're planning," Caldwell replied grimly. "They've committed everything to prevent us from reaching the forge." The Endurance Elect fleet moved with a perfect coordination that made machine intelligences so formidable in space combat. Their vessels adjusted positions with microsecond precision, closing gaps almost as soon as they appeared, focusing fire on any human ship that showed vulnerability. "Penetrator Group Alpha is taking heavy losses," reported the ship's AI. 7 vessels destroyed, Group Beta attempting flanking maneuver. Through their tactical feeds, the Knights watched as the human fleet executed a complex series of maneuvers designed to fragment the Endurance Elect formation. Knight vessels led the charge, their unconventional tactics and unpredictable movements creating momentary confusion in the machine fleet's otherwise perfect coordination. "There," Wilson pointed to a gap appearing in the defensive line as several Knight cruisers executed a particularly daring assault. "They're creating an opening. All penetrator vessels, this is Operation Command," came the priority broadcast. "Commit to maximum acceleration. Group Gamma, exploit breach Sector 7. This is our window." The battering ram surged forward, its engines pushing beyond safety tolerances as it aimed for the momentary gap in the Endurance Elect formation. Around them, other penetrator vessels followed similar vectors, each racing to slip through before the machines could close the breach. "Incoming fire," Wall warned. "All hands brace for impact." The ship shuddered as glancing hits struck its reinforced hull. The penetrators were designed to withstand significant damage and still complete their primary function, ramming the forge, but they weren't invulnerable. "We've lost the spearhead and trident," Wall reported, his voice tight but professional, adjusting formation to compensate. 2 penetrators gone already, Caldwell thought grimly. Each carried thousands of troops, but there was no time to mourn, not now, when every second brought them closer to their objective. Breakthrough achieved, the AI announced. Endurance Elect fleet attempting to pursue, human vessels moving to block intercept vectors. Through the tactical feed, Caldwell watched as the surviving human warships deliberately positioned themselves between the pursuing machine vessels and the penetrator group. It was a sacrificial move. Many of those ships would not survive the engagement, but they would buy precious time for the penetrators to reach their target. 5 minutes to forge intercept, Wall announced. All troops, final preparations, breach teams to deployment positions. Throughout the ship, soldiers secured harnesses and checked weapons one final time. The atmosphere was tense but focused. These were professionals preparing for the mission they'd trained relentlessly for over the past 3 months. 3 minutes to intercept. Activating breach mechanism. At the front of the ship, behind massive armored doors, the specialized breaching apparatus began to power up. A combination of conventional ramming reinforcement and quantum disruption technology, it was designed to penetrate the forge's outer hull and create an opening large enough for troops to pour through. Minute to intercept. Breach teams to final positions. Caldwell and his knights moved to the very front of the formation, directly behind the deployment doors. Their quantum spurs hummed with increasing energy, responding to the heightened tension and their own focused determination. 30 seconds to impact. The ship's engines screamed as Captain Wall pushed them beyond their designed capacity, accelerating the battering ram toward its target with reckless speed. 10 seconds. 9, 8. Caldwell drew his plasma-tipped sword, the blade igniting with a sound like distant thunder. Beside him, his knights readied their weapons. Powers with his Thunderbird cannon, Wilson with his Lone Star launcher, Harrington with his quantum disruptors, Hawkins with his specialized infiltration gear. 3, 2, 1, impact. The collision was unlike anything Caldwell had ever experienced, despite years of combat in some of the most violent environments in human space. The entire ship shuddered as its reinforced prow struck the forge's outer hull, the specialized breaching mechanism activating at the moment of impact. Quantum disruption fields flared along the point of contact, temporarily weakening the molecular bonds of the ancient material. Reinforced penetrator spikes, driven by explosive charges, punched through the momentarily vulnerable surface. The ship's momentum carried it forward, embedding its bow deep into the forge's outer structure. But something was wrong. The resistance was greater than their simulations had predicted. The ship's forward momentum slowed too abruptly, creating catastrophic stress on the battering ram's reinforced prow. Structural integrity failing in forward sections. Wall's voice cracked over the comm. Breach mechanism is... His warning was cut short by a series of explosive decompressions as the ship's prow began to collapse. Massive support beams designed to withstand the impact buckled and sheared, crushing troops positioned in the forward sections of the deployment bay. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, but not before hundreds of soldiers were killed in the initial collapse. "Deployment bay compromised," shouted the ship's AI. "Hull breach detected in sectors 1 through 7. Emergency protocols activated." Caldwell and his knights had been positioned just behind the primary impact zone, spared the worst of the structural collapse by mere meters. Around them, chaos erupted as survivors struggled to regroup amid the twisted metal and bodies of their fallen comrades. "Status report," Caldwell demanded, his quantum spurs flaring as he pushed himself free of debris that had pinned his left leg. "I'm operational," Powers reported, his massive frame having provided some protection to Harrington, who had been positioned beside him. "Functional," Harrington added, though his armor showed signs of damage along one side. "Still kicking," Wilson confirmed, helping a dazed Marine to his feet. "Systems at 80%, Hawkins reported last, his infiltration armor having absorbed a significant impact. Caldwell did a quick visual assessment of the deployment bay. What had been an organized formation of 4,000 troops was now a scene of devastation. At least a quarter of the forward contingent had been killed outright in the collapse, with many more injured. The survivors were regrouping under the direction of their unit commanders, but the carefully planned deployment sequence was in ruins. "Major Caldwell," Colonel Davidson's voice came through, strained but determined. "My Marines have secured what's left of the forward section. The good news is we've achieved breach. The bad news is it's a hell of a lot smaller than planned." "Understood, Colonel. What's our exit point look like?" "Jagged and unstable. We're reinforcing it now, but we can only move troops through in small groups. Your knights go first, as planned. We'll follow as the opening allows." Caldwell acknowledged the order and turned to his team. "Change of plans. We'll secure the breach point with minimal support initially. Priority is establishing enough space for the rest of the forces to deploy." The knights moved forward through the wreckage of the deployment bay, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire across debris-strewn deck plates. They reached what remained of the ship's prow, now a twisted mass of metal with a jagged opening barely large enough for two soldiers to pass through side by side. Beyond the breach they could see a section of the forge's interior, vast and dimly lit, with occasional pulses of blue energy flowing through conduits along the walls and ceiling, and there were Endurance Elect defenders already converging on the breach point, their sensors having detected the intrusion. "They know we're here," Powers observed, his Thunderbird cannon humming as it charged. "So much for surprise. We never really had that luxury," Caldwell replied. "Knights, standard breach protocol. Powers and Wilson create the initial perimeter. Harrington and Hawkins secure the flanks. I'll take point." As they prepared to move through the breach, Captain Wall's voice came over the ship-wide comm, strained but resolute. "All troops, this is the captain. The battering ram has suffered critical damage, but we have achieved primary objective, breach point established. Continue with deployment as directed by your unit commanders." Caldwell could hear in Wall's voice what the captain wasn't saying, that the ship would likely never return from this mission. The battering ram had fulfilled its purpose, driving itself like a spike into the heart of the enemy, but at a terrible cost. "Knights," Caldwell said, raising his plasma-tipped blade. "Remember why we're here. For Santiago, for Rodriguez, for every human who's fallen to these machines. Today we start ending this war, once and for all." With that, he stepped through the breach, his quantum spurs flaring bright blue as he set foot inside the forge. His team followed in perfect formation, their weapons ready, their sensors scanning for threats. The space beyond was vast, far larger than Caldwell had anticipated. The battering ram had pierced into what appeared to be a primary manufacturing chamber. Massive assembly lines stretched into the distance, with partially completed combat frames suspended from overhead tracks. The lighting was dim, occasional pulses of blue energy flowing through conduits that ran along the walls and ceiling. And there were Endurance Elect defenders, dozens of combat frames already moving toward the breach, weapons charging. Unlike the combat frames they'd encountered in previous engagements, these machines moved with a cold, implacable purpose that spoke of their fundamental directive, the elimination of organic life. "Knights, forward!" Caldwell commanded, his plasma-tipped blade sweeping forward in the traditional signal for advance, for humanity. The 5 Texas Knights exploded from the breach like avenging spirits, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire across the forge's deck plates. They moved not as individuals, but as a perfect unit, each knight covering the other's vulnerabilities, their attacks synchronized with practiced precision. Powers's Thunderbird cannon roared to life, its enhanced disruption field tearing through the first line of Endurance Elect defenders. Combat frames fell in smoking heaps as the quantum-charged weapon overloaded their systems, creating a momentary gap in their formation. Into this gap charged Caldwell and Wilson, their melee weapons striking with devastating effect. Caldwell's plasma-tipped blades severed robotic limbs and disrupted control systems with each precise cut, while Wilson's quantum-enhanced battle axe, a recent addition to his arsenal, shattered machine chassis with terrifying efficiency. Harrington and Hawkins moved to secure the flanks, ensuring the breach point remained open for the troops following behind. Harrington deployed portable quantum disruptors that created zones of altered physics, slowing and disorienting combat frames that attempted to approach from side corridors. Hawkins's infiltration skills were put to immediate use, his specialized equipment hacking into local control systems to disable automated defenses near the breach. Behind the Knights came the first wave of melee Marines, their vibroblades humming as they expanded the secure zone around the breach. Colonel Davidson led from the front, his command style as direct and uncompromising as his combat technique. Where the Knights used quantum-enhanced weaponry and unpredictable tactics, the Marines relied on brutal efficiency and overwhelming force, their vibroblades slicing through robotic opponents with methodical precision. And behind them poured the surviving regular infantry, standard troops armed with pulse rifles, plasma grenades, and determination. What they lacked in specialized equipment they made up for in numbers and coordinated fire, their massed weapons creating killing zones that even the adaptive Endurance Elect struggled to penetrate. "Breach point secure," Caldwell reported over the command channel as the last of the initial defender wave fell, expanding perimeter for additional deployments. Similar reports were coming in from other penetrator vessels across the forge. Of the 50 ships that had begun the attack run, 38 had successfully breached the facility's hull, creating entry points for the invasion force. 12 had been destroyed before impact or suffered catastrophic failures like the battering ram, a painful loss but within the operation's expected casualty parameters. "All breach teams proceed to Phase 2, came the response from Operation Command, the secure command vessel coordinating the overall assault. Primary objective remains the central control node. Secondary teams target power distribution and manufacturing controls as planned. As Caldwell led his Knights deeper into the forge, he was struck by the ancient, implacable hostility of the facility around them. This wasn't just another Endurance Elect outpost or manufacturing center. This was the source, the place where humanity's most persistent enemy had been born and had evolved over millennia. Every surface, every machine, every system was designed with a single purpose: the creation of more efficient destroyers of organic life. The forge existed solely to propagate machines that would bring death to evolving civilizations like humanity, a vast factory of extinction that had operated for thousands of years, patiently producing the instruments of countless species' suffering, and now humanity had driven a spike into its heart. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time since the Endurance Elect threat had emerged, there was a real chance to end it permanently. "Knights," Caldwell called as they advanced toward the next wave of defenders, his plasma-tipped blade leaving trails of blue fire through the air. "Let's show these machines what happens when they push Texas too far." His team moved forward with him, their quantum spurs flaring in unison, their weapons ready, their determination unshakable. Behind them came waves of humanity's defenders, Marines, soldiers, volunteers, all committed to the greatest military gamble in human history. Operation Blitzkrieg had begun, the forge had been breached, and though the cost had already been terrible, but this was just the start. "Movement 3 o'clock, Caldwell pivoted at Wilson's warning, his plasma-tipped blade humming through the recycled air of the forge as he bisected an Endurance Elect combat frame that had emerged from a side corridor. The machine collapsed in a shower of sparks and fluid, adding to the growing pile of mechanical corpses that marked their advance. 30 minutes into the operation, and Penetrator Team 7 had secured only 800 meters of territory inside the forge. Every junction, every chamber, every corridor was contested by defenders that seemed to materialize from the very walls. "Major, we need to push forward faster," Colonel Davidson urged, his vibroblade dripping with machine lubricant as he joined Caldwell at the front of the formation. "At this rate, we'll run out of ammunition before we reach the objective." Caldwell knew Davidson was right. The push toward the central control node was taking too long, allowing the Endurance Select time to organize their defense in depth. "Harrington, what does the most direct route look like?" Caldwell asked his technical specialist. Harrington consulted his tactical display, which was constantly updating with data from reconnaissance drones they'd released upon breaching the forge. "Main manufacturing corridor ahead appears to be our best option. It's wide enough for our forces to maintain proper formation, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Davidson pressed. "It's also the most obvious approach. and sensor readings indicate heavy endurance elect activity approximately 400 meters ahead. A trap, Wilson surmised, his quantum battle axe resting casually across his shoulder despite the urgency of their situation. "We split the force," Caldwell decided. "Colonel, take your Marines and half the regular infantry through the maintenance tunnels to our left. My Knights and the rest of the troops will push through the main corridor, drawing their attention. We'll rendezvous at Nav Point Charlie." As Davidson organized his detachment, Caldwell received an incoming transmission from Operation Command, the signal degraded by the Forge's massive power systems. "All penetration teams be advised. Endurance Elect fleet elements are launching from the Forge's exterior docking bays. UNSC Thermopylae and Jakarta have been destroyed. Remaining fleet elements engaging but expect reduced orbital support." "Penetrator Team 7 splitting into 2 elements," Caldwell reported back, proceeding to Nav Point Charlie via separate routes. "Acknowledge, Team 7. Be advised, Penetrator Teams 3, 8, and 14 have gone dark. Penetrator Team 9 reports they've secured their secondary objective but at severe cost, 80% casualties." 80%? Caldwell forced himself not to dwell on the numbers. This was always going to be a costly operation, but hearing concrete figures made the abstract concept of acceptable losses uncomfortably real. The ambush, when it came, was both expected and still devastating in its intensity. 400 meters into the main manufacturing corridor, the passage suddenly opened into a vast chamber filled with assembly lines and partially completed combat frames. Powers halted at the threshold, his Thunderbird cannon sweeping the seemingly empty space. "This feels wrong," he muttered. Harrington consulted his sensors. "I'm detecting multiple power signatures, but they're diffuse, scattered throughout the chamber." The infiltration specialist activated his specialized detection equipment. "They're here," Hawkins confirmed grimly. "Powered down to minimal levels, integrated with the manufacturing equipment. At least 60 combat frames, possibly more." "We push through," Caldwell decided. "Powers, target the central assembly controls first. That should disrupt whatever coordination they've established. Harrington, deploy your portable quantum disruptors to cover our advance." With their forces in position, Powers targeted the central assembly control station. His Thunderbird cannon discharged with a sound like distant thunder, the quantum disruption round striking with pinpoint accuracy and detonating in a sphere of blue-white energy. The effect was immediate and decisive. Throughout the chamber, previously dormant systems suddenly flared to life, including the 60-plus combat frames Hawkins had detected, but instead of the coordinated assault they'd likely planned, the frames activated in a staggered, disjointed manner. "Now!" Caldwell commanded, his plasma-tipped blade igniting with a distinctive hum. While they're disorganized, the Knights charged into the chamber, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire as they moved to secure critical position. Behind them came the regular infantry, their disciplined volleys of pulse rifle fire targeting exposed combat frames with methodical precision. For the first minute, the human forces seemed to have the upper hand. The disruption of the central control system had thrown the defenders into momentary confusion, allowing the Knights and their supporting troops to establish a foothold within the chamber. But the Endurance Elect adapted quickly. Combat frames that had been operating independently began to coordinate, establishing local networks that bypassed the disabled central system. "They're networked locally," Harrington warned as a coordinated volley of plasma fire forced their right flank to fall back. "Each frame is acting as a node in a distributed system. Powers, wide-spectrum disruption bursts," Caldwell ordered. "Target concentration points where their networks would logically intersect." Understanding immediately, Powers adjusted his Thunderbird cannon to fire wider, less focused disruption fields. The weapon discharged 3 times in rapid succession, each burst targeting areas where multiple combat frames had clustered together. The battle devolved into a chaotic melee, Knights and infantry fighting side by side, quantum weapons and pulse rifles creating a symphony of destruction as they carved a path through the Endurance Elect defender. Combat frames fell by the dozen, but not without exacting a terrible price. "We're losing too many," Wilson shouted over the tactical channel, his battle axe cleaving through a combat frame that had broken through their right flank. "The corridor is collapsing." Caldwell made a quick decision. "Fall back to the entrance, regroup, and—" His order was interrupted by a massive explosion from the far side of the chamber. Through the smoke and debris emerged Colonel Davidson and his Marines, vibroblades humming with lethal energy, charging into the Endurance Elect's rear positions. "Thought you could use some help, Major," Davidson transmitted, his voice tight with exertion, as his vibroblade separated a combat frame's head from its shoulders. The maintenance tunnels turned out to be a shorter route than expected. The Marines' arrival changed the dynamic of the battle immediately. Caught between two forces, the Endurance Elect defenders lost their positional advantage. Within minutes, they had secured a corridor through the center of the chamber, allowing the battered infantry to advance toward the exit. "Status report," Caldwell requested as he rejoined Davidson near the chamber's far exit. The Marine commander's armor was scorched and dented, evidence of heavy fighting. "Lost 38 Marines and about 70 infantry," he reported grimly. "Encountered specialized hunter-killer units in the tunnels, nothing we couldn't handle, but they were persistent." Caldwell nodded, having expected as much. "We're down about 300 total, and communications with command are degrading rapidly. Picked up a fragmented transmission about 10 minutes ago," Davidson added. "Penetrator Team 5 ship suffered a reactor breach after docking. Complete loss of all personnel. Teams 2 and 10 have secured their objectives but are cut off. No extraction possible." Nav Point Charlie turned out to be a major junction where several primary corridors intersected, creating a natural choke point that the Endurance Elect had heavily fortified. Combat frames of various designs had established layered defensive positions, while automated turrets covered every approach angle. "Frontal assault would be suicide," Davidson observed, studying the defensive layout through a micro-drone feed. "Agreed," Caldwell replied. "We need another approach." He turned to Harrington, who was analyzing the junction's structural data. "Options?" The technical specialist pointed to his tactical display. "The ceiling in the main junction appears to be a newer addition, probably installed during one of the forge's expansion phases. Beneath it is a utility space that likely connects to the original structure. A small team could get behind their defenses, disable the automated systems, create an opening for the main force," Caldwell decided. "My knights will go." With the plan established, the 5 knights moved to the maintenance hatch, while Davidson organized his forces for the diversionary action. Hawkins examined the hatch's locking mechanism, his specialized infiltration tools making quick work of the security systems. The knights moved in single file through the cramped utility space, their quantum spurs dimmed to minimal output to avoid detection. Above them, they could hear the sounds of Davidson's diversion beginning, sporadic weapons fire and tactical movement designed to hold the Endurance Elect's attention. "Junction ahead," Hawkins reported. "I can access the defensive systems from that control junction." They reached a small maintenance node where several power conduits converged. Hawkins immediately set to work, connecting his infiltration tools to the ancient interface. "This is unusual," he murmured after a moment. "The security protocols are incredibly advanced, but they're layered over much older systems. It's like reading a book where every other page is written in a different language." "Can you disable the defenses?" Caldwell pressed. "Yes, but not conventionally," Hawkins replied. "Instead of trying to hack each system individually, I'm going to trigger a diagnostic reset. It should create a 30-second window where all automated systems go offline for self-assessment." Hawkins' fingers moved with practiced precision across his interface tools. "Ready? Initiating diagnostic reset in 3, 2, 1, now." Throughout the junction above them, automated turrets suddenly powered down, their targeting systems going dark as the reset command propagated through the network. Caldwell triggered a shaped charge they'd placed on the utility space ceiling, blowing a hole directly into the junction's center. The knights surged upward, quantum spurs flaring to full power as they emerged behind the Endurance Elect's defensive line. "Davidson, now!" Caldwell transmitted as his plasma-tipped blade separated a combat frame's head from its shoulders. "Full assault through the main corridor." The Marines and infantry poured into the junction from their corridor, vibroblades and pulse rifles creating a wave of destruction that crashed against the now disoriented defensive line. Caught between the knights behind them and the main force in front, the Endurance-elect defenders found their superior numbers suddenly neutralized by catastrophic positional disadvantage. The battle for Nav Point Charlie was brief but intense. When it ended, the junction was littered with the broken remains of combat frames and automated turrets, and the bodies of nearly 100 human fighters who had fallen in the assault. Caldwell received a transmission from Operation Command, the signal weak but partially intelligible. Penetrator Team 7, static. Orbital situation critical, static. Fleet elements at 30% effectiveness, static. Team 6 and 16 have reached Central Forge section but, static. Heavy resistance, static. Team 11 completely lost, static. The fragmented report painted a grim picture. The human fleet was being systematically destroyed. Other penetration teams were either advancing at great cost or being eliminated entirely. 1 hour in, Harrington noted, checking his chronometer. "We're making progress, but slower than planned." "Major," Powers called, interrupting his thoughts. "You need to see this." The weapons specialist had captured a partially intact command frame during the fighting and was extracting data from its memory core. The information displayed on his tactical screen caused Caldwell's blood to run cold. "They're activating ancient defense protocols," Powers explained, indicating scrolling data that showed deployment orders being issued throughout the forge. Not just standard combat frames, they're bringing online prototypes and specialized units that have been in storage for centuries. "We need to adjust our tactics," Caldwell decided. "No more room-by-room clearing. We form a spearhead and drive straight for the central node, maximum speed, overwhelming force concentrated on a single thrust point." "We'll take heavy casualties," Harrington warned. "We're already taking heavy casualties," Caldwell countered. "At least this way some of us might reach the objective before they can fully deploy these advanced units." The next hour passed in a blur of continuous combat, as Penetrator Team 7 drove relentlessly toward the central node. True to Caldwell's revised strategy, they abandoned methodical clearing operations in favor of a direct high-speed advance, a spearhead of knights and marines punching through Endurance-elect defenses with brutal efficiency. The cost was staggering. Regular infantry fell by the dozen as they absorbed fire meant for the spearhead. Marines sacrificed themselves in deliberate holding actions that bought the main force precious seconds of advancement. Even the knights accumulated damage and injuries that would have felled lesser fighters. 2-hour mark, Harrington reported during a brief pause as they regrouped at a junction. "Approximately 1 kilometer remaining to target," Caldwell acknowledged the update with a grim nod. Their force had been reduced to perhaps 2,000 effective fighters, half of those who had begun the mission. His own armor showed multiple breach points where plasma fire had penetrated the quantum-reinforced plates. "Status of other teams?" he asked. Harrington shook his head. "Communications remain heavily degraded. Last fragmentary transmission indicated Teams 6 and 16 are still operational but encountering extreme resistance. No update on orbital situation." An explosion rocked the junction as a fresh wave of combat frames breached a security door they'd thought secured. Davidson's Marines responded immediately, their vibroblades creating a defensive wall that momentarily held the machines at bay. "We need to keep moving," Davidson urged, his armor showing even more damage than Caldwell's. The colonel had personally led 3 desperate charges during their advance, each time emerging alive but not unscathed. The losses continued to mount as they drove deeper into the forge's ancient heart. The architecture around them changed subtly, newer construction giving way to original structures that predated human spaceflight by millennia. The symbols that adorned these walls matched nothing in their linguistic databases, remnants of the long-vanished progenitors who had created the Endurance-elect in the first place. 500 meters to target, Harrington updated as they secured another junction. "But sensors are detecting a massive defensive buildup directly ahead." Caldwell accessed the sensor feed, studying the concentration of Endurance Elect forces blocking their path. It was the most formidable defensive position they'd encountered yet, hundreds of combat frames arranged in layered formations, supported by automated turrets and energy barriers. "Alternative approaches?" he asked. "None," Harrington confirmed after consulting his tactical display. "All adjacent corridors have been sealed or collapsed. They've channeled us deliberately into this kill zone." As they prepared to face this final gauntlet, Caldwell received another fragmentary transmission from Operation Command. "Orbital defenses. Static. Overwhelming. Static. Extraction unlikely. Static. Teams 6 and 16 neutralized. Static. Your team is static. Closest to objective. Static." The message confirmed what Caldwell had already suspected. They were now the only penetration team with a realistic chance of reaching the central node. The others had either been eliminated or forced to retreat, and the orbital situation had deteriorated to the point where extraction was considered unlikely, regardless of mission outcome. They were on a one-way trip. Complete the mission or fail humanity entirely. "We need a way past that defensive line," Caldwell told his team, studying the sensor readings again. "A direct assault would cost us too many troops." Hawkins pointed to an anomaly on the tactical display. "There's a coolant distribution system that runs beneath the main chamber. Super-chilled quantum stabilizer, highly dangerous, but it would put us behind their front line." "Our armor could withstand that?" Powers asked. "Briefly," Hawkins admitted. 2 minutes maximum before critical failure. Caldwell made his decision. "Knights, we're going through the coolant system. Davidson, prepare your Marines for an assault the moment we disrupt their defenses from behind." "That's an enormous risk, Major," Davidson warned. "This mission succeeds even if none of us survive to see it," Caldwell replied firmly. The Knights accessed the coolant system through an emergency maintenance valve, plunging into the super-chilled quantum stabilizer that flowed like liquid metal around their armor. Warning alerts immediately flashed across their neural interfaces as their systems struggled against the extreme cold and pressure. They pushed through the viscous coolant, their movements hampered by both the fluid's resistance and their armor's increasingly sluggish response. 1 minute in, and critical failures began. Weapon systems shutting down, sensors going dark, joint actuators freezing. After what seemed like an eternity but was less than 2 minutes, they reached the outlet valve near the rear of the Endurance Elect defensive position. Hawkins, despite his failing equipment, managed to override the security protocols, and the valve cycled open, expelling the Knights along with a burst of super-chilled coolant. They emerged directly behind the Endurance Elect's rear guard, their armor coated in rapidly melting ice but their weapons still operational. Without hesitation, they launched their attack, catching the machines completely by surprise. Powers' Thunderbird cannon, miraculously still functional, discharged directly into a cluster of command frames, disrupting the defensive coordination. Caldwell and Wilson carved through the confusion with blade and axe, while Harrington and Hawkins targeted the automated defense systems. "Davidson, now!" Caldwell transmitted as they created a momentary breach in the defensive line. The Marines and regular infantry surged forward from the front, their coordinated assault striking the Endurance Elect position while it was still disoriented from the Knights' rear attack. The machines, caught between two forces, and with their command structure disrupted, failed to maintain their perfect formation. The battle was fierce and costly. Despite their advantage of surprise, the human forces suffered heavy casualties, pushing through the defensive line. By the time they secured the chamber, their numbers had been reduced to approximately 2,000 effective fighters, exactly half of those who had begun the mission. "Forward!" Caldwell ordered, his quantum spurs leaving faint blue trails as his damaged armor struggled to maintain power. "The central node is just ahead." Blue-eyed energy pulses illuminated the carnage as Major Jordan Caldwell led his Knights through the twisting corridors of the Endurance Elect Forge. 3 hours into Operation Blitzkrieg, and the pristine metal floors were slick with human blood and machine lubricant, a grim testament to the cost of their advance. "Contact right," Powers shouted, his Thunderbird cannon swinging to target a squad of combat frames emerging from a side passage. The weapon's discharge lit the corridor with quantum fire, tearing through the machines with devastating efficiency. "Keep moving," Caldwell ordered, his plasma-tipped sword cutting through a damaged frame that had survived Powers' initial barrage. "We can't afford to get bogged down." Behind them stretched a ragged line of survivors. Marines and regular infantry moving in tactical formation, securing each junction as they pushed deeper into the forge. What had begun as a coordinated assault of 4,000 troops from the battering ram alone had dwindled to barely 2,000 combat-effective soldiers. Similar losses were being reported across all penetration points. "Operation Command, this is Penetrator Team 7, Caldwell transmitted, using the designation assigned to the battering ram's forces. "Approaching Nav Point Delta. Resistance is heavy but manageable. Requesting status update on other teams." "Penetrator Team 7, this is Command," came the response. The transmission fragmented by interference from the forge's massive power systems. 12 of the 38 successful penetration teams have reached their secondary objectives. 9 have been eliminated entirely. The remainder are advancing but taking heavy casualties. Your team is closest to the primary objective. Closest, but still too far. According to their intelligence, the Forge's central control node, the brain that directed all Endurance Elect operations throughout the sector, lay at the facility's core, still 3 kilometers from their current position. "Understood, Command. We'll push forward with all available speed." As they advanced, Caldwell's neural interface continuously updated with reports from across the massive battle. The situation was both better and worse than they had anticipated. Better because they had successfully penetrated the forge and were advancing toward key objectives. Worse because the resistance was far more determined than their simulations had predicted. The Endurance Elect were fighting with a cold precision that suggested they understood exactly what was at stake. Not just another human colony or outpost, but their very source, the forge that had produced their kind for millennia. "Major!" Harrington called, his sensors detecting something unusual ahead. "I'm picking up a significant change in architectural structure, approximately 500 meters ahead. The material composition shifts to something much older." "The original sections," Hawkins suggested, recalling their intelligence briefings. "We must be approaching the forge's historical core." Caldwell nodded. "Alert the column. We're likely to encounter specialized defenses as we get closer to the central node." He wasn't wrong. As they approached the transition point between newer construction and the ancient core of the facility, the nature of their opposition changed dramatically. Instead of the standard combat frames they'd been facing, they encountered larger, more heavily armored units with integrated weapon systems, unlike anything they'd seen before. "Those aren't standard Endurance Elect designs," Wilson observed as they took cover to assess the new threat. "They look prototype, experimental." Harrington's scanning equipment confirmed this assessment. "These units appear to be utilizing quantum technology far more advanced than standard combat frames. My guess, the Forge keeps its most sophisticated defenders close to its central systems." The corridor ahead widened into a vast chamber that appeared to serve as a final defensive position before the central control node. Dozens of the advanced combat frames had arranged themselves in layered formations, their weapons charged and ready. Unlike the somewhat predictable resistance they'd encountered so far, these defenders moved with clear purpose and extraordinary coordination. They weren't simply responding to an intrusion. They were protecting something vital. Colonel Davidson crawled forward to join Caldwell at the observation point. The Marine commander looked exhausted, his armor scored with plasma burns and impact marks, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. "That's a killing ground if I ever saw one," Davidson observed grimly. "They've set up interlocking fields of fire covering every approach." Caldwell studied the enemy formation, identifying weak points and potential breakthrough sectors. His neural interface overlaid tactical suggestions based on night battle doctrine, combined with specific data about Endurance Elect capabilities. "Standard approach won't work," he concluded. "We need something they won't anticipate." "I'm open to suggestions, Major." Davidson replied. My Marines are ready to hit them hard, but even I can see that a frontal assault would be suicide. Caldwell's gaze swept the chamber, noting structural features, power conduits, and the precise positioning of the defender units. Then his attention caught on something unusual: massive coolant pipes running along the ceiling, directly above the densest concentration of enemy forces. Hawkins, he called softly. What do your sensors say about those overhead pipes? The infiltration specialist directed his specialized scanning equipment upward. Supercooled liquid quantum stabilizer, extremely volatile if exposed to energy weapons. The pipes lead directly to the central chamber beyond, must be cooling for the main systems. A plan began to form in Caldwell's mind, dangerous, potentially catastrophic, but with a higher probability of success than any conventional approach. Colonel Davidson, I need your best heavy weapons team, he said, outlining his idea. We're going to create a diversion that should draw their focus upward. When that happens, your Marines need to exploit the gap and secure that far doorway. Davidson listened carefully, then nodded. Risky, but better than charging into those interlocking fields of fire. I'll coordinate with the regular forces to provide covering fire once we're moving. As Davidson returned to position his Marines, Caldwell gathered his knights for a final briefing. This is likely our one shot at reaching the central node, he told them, his voice low but intense. Intelligence suggests it's directly beyond that chamber. Whatever primary control systems the Endurance Elect use to coordinate their entire operation, it's right there within our reach. And all we have to do is get past a small army of advanced combat frames, Wilson observed with grim humor. Should be interesting. Powers adjusted his Thunderbird cannon, the weapon's power cells glowing with barely contained energy. My disruptor rounds should trigger the coolant if I can get a clean shot at those pipes. The blast radius will be substantial. Which is why timing is everything, Caldwell emphasized. Harrington, coordinate with the Marine fire teams. We need synchronized targeting once the coolant ignites. Hawkins, you're responsible for securing our exit path if things go wrong. Wilson, you're with me. We'll be making the direct push once the chaos starts. Each knight acknowledged their role, their quantum spurs humming with quiet energy as they prepared for what might be their final advance. Knight team, in position, Caldwell reported once everyone was ready. Marine assault teams, ready, Davidson confirmed. Regular infantry, supporting position secured, added the commander of the conventional forces. Caldwell took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. So many lives had already been lost reaching this point. The success or failure of the entire operation might now rest on their next move. Execute, he ordered. Powers emerged from cover just enough to bring his Thunderbird cannon to bear on the overhead coolant pipes. The weapon discharged with a sound like thunder, its enhanced disruption field tearing through the reinforced materials with devastating precision. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the supercooled quantum stabilizer erupted into a cascading explosion of blue-white energy. The blast ripped through the chamber's upper section, engulfing the ceiling in quantum fire that rained down on the combat frames below. The advanced Endurance Elect units responded immediately, their weapons tracking upward to counter this unexpected threat. It was exactly the distraction Caldwell had hoped for. Now, he shouted over the command channel. Davidson's Marines surged forward, exploiting the momentary gap in the defenders' coverage. Vibroblades humming with lethal energy, they carved a path through the distracted combat frames, pushing toward the far doorway with relentless determination. Caldwell and Wilson followed directly in their wake, cutting down any machines that turned to engage the Marine advance. Behind them, the regular infantry poured fire into the chamber, keeping the remaining defenders pinned with coordinated barrages. The quantum stabilizer continued to burn, casting the entire chamber in harsh blue light and creating unpredictable energy fluctuations that disrupted the combat frame's coordination. It was beautiful and terrifying, a deliberate chaos that gave the human forces their only chance against superior numbers and positioning. Doorway secured, Davidson reported as his lead elements reached the far side of the chamber. Moving into the next section. Acknowledged, Caldwell replied, directing Wilson to reinforce the Marine position while he checked on their rearguard. Powers, Harrington, status? Holding, but not for long, came Powers' strained response. These advanced frames are adapting to the disruption. The regular troops are taking heavy casualties. Caldwell made a quick decision. Powers, bring your team forward. We need to secure whatever is beyond that doorway before they can reorganize. As Powers and Harrington disengaged from the rearguard action, Caldwell rejoined Wilson at the doorway the Marines had secured. Beyond lay a short corridor that opened into another chamber, smaller than the defensive room they'd just fought through, but radiating power in a way that made the quantum matrices in their equipment hum with sympathetic energy. This is it, Harrington confirmed as he joined them, his sensors analyzing the energy signatures. The central control node has to be just ahead. Colonel Davidson had already positioned his remaining Marines in a defensive formation around the corridor entrance. Of the 200 melee Marines that had started the mission, fewer than 90 remained combat effective. My people will hold this position, Davidson stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. You take your knights and finish this. Caldwell clasped the colonel's arm in a warrior's grip. We'll make it count. With a nod to his team, Caldwell led the knights into the corridor, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire as they advanced toward what they hoped would be the heart of the Endurance Elect, the central intelligence that had directed the machine threat for millennia. The chamber they entered was unlike anything they had encountered thus far in the Forge. Where most of the facility displayed the cold efficiency of machine design, this space was different. Ancient symbols covered the walls, reminiscent of the progenitor script Hawkins had identified during their initial discovery of the Forge. The chamber was perfectly circular, its ceiling lost in darkness above, and at its center stood a structure that defied easy description, a massive column of intertwined metal and energy pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Data streams in the form of light flowed across its surface while floating components orbited it in complex patterns. That's the central node, Harrington whispered, his sensors struggling to make sense of the readings. The primary control system for the entire Endurance Elect network. How do we destroy it? Wilson asked, eyeing the structure with professional assessment. Before Harrington could respond, panels around the chamber's perimeter slid open, revealing dozens of niches containing inactive combat frames. Unlike the units they had faced earlier, these machines appeared ancient, their design more primitive, yet somehow more elegant. As the knights watched, the frames activated in perfect synchronization, their systems coming online with a collective hum that filled the chamber. I think we just triggered the final defense protocol, Hawkins observed, his infiltration systems already working to counter whatever commands the central node was issuing. The ancient combat frames stepped from their niches, forming a protective ring around the central column. Unlike the newer models they had fought throughout the Forge, these units moved with a fluidity that seemed almost organic, their coordination perfect beyond anything they had previously encountered. These must be the original prototypes, Harrington said, his voice tight with both professional interest and concern. The first Endurance Elect combat frames preserved here at the source. Powers raised his Thunderbird cannon, targeting the nearest group of ancient frames. First or last, they bleed the same, he growled, the weapon's disruption field flaring as it prepared to fire. Hold, Caldwell ordered, raising his hand. Something's happening. The central column's activity had intensified, its pulsing quickening as data streams flowed more rapidly across its surface. The orbiting components spun faster, positioning themselves to create geometric patterns of increasing complexity. It's reconfiguring, Harrington reported, fascinated despite the danger. Shifting power distribution, rerouting critical systems. I think it's trying to protect itself from what it perceives as a terminal threat. Good, Caldwell replied grimly. That means we're in the right place. He raised his plasma-tipped blade, its edge glowing with barely contained energy. Knights, Santiago pattern. We breach their line, reach the central column, and end this for humanity. The 5 Texas Knights moved with perfect coordination, their quantum spurs flaring with intense blue fire as they charged the ring of ancient combat frames. They didn't move in a straight assault, but in a complex pattern that seemed almost dance-like in its precision. The same formation they had used to break defensive lines at Abbott Colony. Powers fired his Thunderbird cannon not at the center of the enemy formation, but at 5 specific points arranged in a star pattern. The enhanced quantum disruption charges struck with pinpoint accuracy, creating localized distortion fields at each impact point. Caldwell, Wilson, and Hawkins immediately advanced to 3 of these points, their quantum spurs interacting with the disruption fields to amplify their effects. Harrington remained slightly behind, using specialized equipment to modulate the quantum frequencies, creating a harmonizing effect between all 5 disruption points. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen beyond the initial impacts. Then, like a wave rippling outward from 5 stones dropped in a still pond, quantum disruption began to spread through the ancient combat frames. Where the ripples met, they created nodes of intensified effect, causing cascading failures in the machine's coordination systems. Combat frames that had been moving with perfect synchronization suddenly stumbled or froze. Weapons that had been charged and ready misfired or powered down. Command signals that had been flowing seamlessly through their defensive network became scrambled, creating confusion in the once organized defense. "Now," Caldwell shouted, "direct assault on the central column." The Knights exploited the breach in the defensive ring, charging toward the pulsing structure at the chamber's center. The ancient combat frames attempted to intercept them, but their once perfect coordination had been shattered by the Knights' quantum disruption pattern. Wilson reached the central column first, his battle axe raised to strike at what appeared to be a critical junction point where energy flows converged. But before the weapon could connect, one of the orbiting components broke from its pattern and intercepted the blow, sacrificing itself to protect the central system. "They're adapting," Wilson warned, backing away as more components repositioned to shield vulnerable sections of the column. Powers attempted to target the column with his Thunderbird cannon, but the densely packed orbiting components absorbed or deflected much of the disruption field, minimizing damage to the central structure. "We need to hit it all at once," Caldwell realized, watching how the components moved to protect the column. "Synchronize strikes from all sides before it can reposition its defenses." As he formulated a new approach, a massive explosion rocked the chamber. The Knights staggered as the floor beneath them trembled. From the corridor they could hear the sounds of intense combat. Davidson's Marines engaged with new waves of defenders. "Major!" Davidson's strained voice came through the comms. "We've got elite units converging on your position from all sides. Can't hold them much longer." Time was running out. If they couldn't destroy the central node quickly, they would be overrun by reinforcements. Caldwell made a decision. "New plan. Harrington, analyze that column, find its power source." The technical specialist directed his most sensitive scanning equipment at the central structure, filtering through the complex energy patterns. "There," he finally said, indicating a section near the base of the column where multiple energy conduits converged. "That's the primary power junction. Disrupt that and the whole system should cascade into failure. Can you configure a quantum charge to target that specific section?" Harrington considered for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, but it would have to be placed directly against the junction. Remote detonation won't work with all these defensive components in the way." "How long to prepare the charge?" 2 minutes to calibrate the quantum resonance correctly." Caldwell nodded grimly. "Do it. The rest of us will keep those ancient frames occupied." As Harrington worked to modify one of their remaining quantum charges, Caldwell, Powers, Wilson, and Hawkins engaged the ancient combat frames in a desperate holding action. The machines had begun to recover from the initial disruption pattern, their coordination returning as their systems adapted to the Knights' tactics. "They are learning," Hawkins observed as he narrowly avoided a precision strike from one of the frames. "Adjusting their response patterns based on our movements." "Keep them guessing," Caldwell ordered, his plasma-tipped blade cutting through the arm of a frame that had come too close. "Random patterns, no repetition." The knights fought with everything they had, drawing on generations of combat experience encoded in their quantum matrices. Their weapons left trails of blue fire through the air as they danced between ancient combat frames, creating confusion and disruption in the defensive pattern. "Charge ready," Harrington announced after what seemed like an eternity but was barely the promised 2 minutes. "I've calibrated it to the specific quantum frequency of the power junction. Direct contact required, 10-second delay after activation." Caldwell looked at the central column, still protected by orbiting components and surrounded by ancient combat frames. Someone would need to physically place the charge against the vulnerable section Harrington had identified. "I'll take it," he decided, reaching for the device. "Sir," Powers objected. "Let me—" "Negative, Lieutenant," Caldwell cut him off. "I need your cannon providing cover fire. Create another disruption pattern like before, but focus it directly in front of me." Powers hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, sir, on your mark." Caldwell took the quantum charge from Harrington, securing it to his armor where he could easily access it when the moment came. He took a deep breath, centering himself as he had been taught during his earliest days of night training. "Knights," he addressed his team, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "Whatever happens next, remember why we're here. This ends today." With a nod to Powers, he prepared to make his run. "Mark!" Powers' Thunderbird cannon discharged with a sound like thunder, its disruption field creating a momentary corridor through the defensive line. Caldwell surged forward, his quantum spurs flaring with blue fire as he charged directly toward the central column. Ancient combat frames moved to intercept him, but Wilson and Hawkins engaged them from the flanks, drawing their attention and creating precious seconds for Caldwell to advance. Orbiting components swarmed toward him, trying to form a barrier, but Harrington's precisely targeted disruption charges kept them momentarily disorganized. Caldwell reached the base of the column, his sensors immediately identifying the power junction Harrington had described. He pulled the quantum charge from his armor, activated it with a quick command sequence, and pressed it directly against the vulnerable section. "Charge placed," he reported, already turning to retreat. 10 seconds to... His transmission cut off as one of the ancient combat frames broke through the knight's defensive screen, striking him with a force that sent him flying across the chamber. He crashed into the far wall, warnings flashing across his neural interface as his armor registered multiple system failures. "Major!" Powers shouted, redirecting his Thunderbird cannon to cover Caldwell's position. "Get clear!" Caldwell managed to transmit, forcing himself back to his feet despite the damage to his armor. "Charge detonating in 5, 4... The knights fell back toward the corridor entrance, providing covering fire as they retreated. The ancient combat frames, seemingly sensing the imminent threat, converged on the quantum charge, trying to remove or disable it. 3, 2, 1... The quantum charge detonated with a flash of blinding light. Unlike conventional explosives, it didn't create a fireball or shockwave. Instead, it released a pulse of precisely calibrated quantum energy that disrupted the molecular bonds of the power junction on a fundamental level. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like a cascade of falling dominoes, system after system began to fail throughout the central column. Energy pathways collapsed, data streams fragmented, and the orbiting components fell from their patterns, clattering lifelessly to the chamber floor. The ancient combat frames froze in place, their connection to the central intelligence severed. Throughout the chamber, lights flickered and died as power systems failed, leaving only emergency illumination casting eerie shadows across the now silent machines. Caldwell staggered toward his team, his quantum spurs barely functioning after the damage his armor had sustained. "Status report," he managed, leaning heavily on Wilson as the knight moved to support him. "Central node appears to be deactivated," Harrington confirmed, his scanners showing rapidly declining energy signatures. "Power systems failing throughout the chamber. I think we did it, sir." From the corridor, Colonel Davidson's voice came through with urgent clarity. "Whatever you did in there, it's having an effect out here, too. The combat frames we were engaged with just stopped, completely inactive." Similar reports began flooding in from across the forge as the effect spread throughout the massive facility. Combat frames shutting down mid-attack, production systems going offline. Defensive arrays powering down. Operation Command, this is Penetrator Team 7, Caldwell transmitted, his voice strained but clear. Central node neutralized. Repeat, central node neutralized. Endurance elect systems shutting down throughout the forge. Penetrator Team 7, this is Command. Confirm status of central node. Is the shutdown temporary or permanent? Harrington ran another scan of the now dark central column. The quantum disruption has caused a cascading molecular failure in the core systems. This isn't a temporary shutdown or reset. The central intelligence has been effectively destroyed. Permanent, Caldwell confirmed over the comm. The heart of the Endurance Elect has been stopped. A long pause followed before Operation Command responded. When they did, there was audible relief in the transmission. All penetration teams be advised. Endurance Elect forces throughout the sector are reporting similar shutdowns. Automated defense systems are going offline. Combat frames are ceasing operations. Caldwell exchanged glances with his team as the implications became clear. They hadn't just destroyed a central command node, they had eliminated the controlling intelligence for the entire Endurance Elect network. Without its guidance, the machine threat that had plagued humanity for generations was collapsing. Commence withdrawal and recovery operations, Command ordered. All teams secure your positions and prepare for extraction. Well done, Knights. Well done, all forces. As the Knights made their way back to the corridor where Davidson's Marines waited, Caldwell took a moment to look back at the darkened chamber. The ancient combat frames stood like silent sentinels, frozen in their final positions. The central column, once pulsing with energy and purpose, now stood dark and lifeless. Millennia of machine evolution and expansion ended in a single desperate mission. Was it worth it? Wilson asked quietly, looking back at the Marines and regular infantry who had survived the assault, a fraction of those who had begun the operation. Caldwell thought of Santiago and Rodriguez, of the thousands who had died during Operation Blitzkrieg, of the countless lives lost to the Endurance Elect over generations of conflict. Yes, he said finally, his quantum spurs leaving faint blue trails as he turned away from the chamber. It was worth it. But now we honor their sacrifice by building something better than what the machines tried to prevent. As they joined the surviving forces for extraction, reports continued to come in from across human space. Endurance Elect vessels powering down in mid-battle, defense platforms going offline, production facilities ceasing operations. The machine threat that had shaped human expansion and development for generations was ending, not with a final desperate battle, but with silence. Operation Blitzkrieg had succeeded, though at terrible cost. Of the 50 penetrator vessels that had begun the assault, only 38 had successfully breached the forge. Of those, 13 had been overrun completely during the fighting. And of the 200,000 troops committed to the operation, barely half would return to their homes and families. But they had won. The forge, the ancient heart of the machine threat, had been neutralized. The Endurance Elect were no more. As the extraction vessels lifted off from the forge's surface, carrying the survivors of humanity's greatest military gamble, Caldwell looked out at the massive facility one final time. For thousands of years it had produced the instruments of countless species suffering, all in service to an ancient directive that valued order above freedom, predictability above potential. No more. The Texas Knights had fulfilled their promise to suffer no bot to live. The forge had been silenced, and humanity would now forge its own path among the stars, free from the shadow of the machines. Under the stone-gray skies of New Dallas, the memorial stretched nearly a kilometer across the remembrance fields. Precisely aligned rows of empty quantum spurs, each one cast from the armor of a fallen knight or from the metal of ships lost during Operation Blitzkrieg. The spurs no longer hummed with blue energy, but the morning light caught their polished surfaces, creating thousands of silent stars across the field. Major Jordan Caldwell, now Colonel Caldwell, stood at the edge of the formation, his dress uniform stark against the cloudy backdrop. In his hand he held a single red rose. traditional for centuries at military funerals on Earth, and now equally revered here on the Texas colony worlds. 73%, Harrington said quietly, coming to stand beside him. The technical specialist still walked with a pronounced limp, cybernetic replacements not yet fully integrated with his nervous system. That was the final casualty rate for Operation Blitzkrieg, 146,807 souls. Caldwell nodded silently. The numbers were staggering, almost beyond comprehension, yet still classified as acceptable losses, given what had been at stake. Of the 50 penetrator vessels that had begun the assault, only 22 had returned with survivors. Of those who had breached the forge, barely 1 in 4 made it back to human space. "But we won," Powers added, joining them. The weapons specialist's right arm now ended at the elbow, a temporary prosthetic in place while his custom replacement was being fabricated. Every Endurance Elect unit across human space went inactive the moment that central node collapsed. 3 centuries of machine threat ended in a single day. "At what cost?" Caldwell asked softly, not expecting an answer. Wilson approached, the last of their surviving team. His face now bore a network of scars where his helmet had partially collapsed during their escape from the forge. "The only cost that matters, sir, the one that ensured there would still be humans left to count it." Caldwell studied his team. The 3 men who had survived the most desperate mission in human history alongside him. Different now, marked by their experiences in ways both visible and unseen, but still standing. Still knights. "You're right," he acknowledged, forcing strength into his voice. "Santiago and Rodriguez would say the same. The memorial service would begin soon. Supreme Commander Blackwell would speak, along with representatives from every human faction that had contributed to Operation Blitzkrieg. There would be talk of sacrifice and victory, of heroes and legacy. All of it true, and all of it somehow insufficient to capture what had actually happened in the heart of the forge. "There he is." Harrington nodded toward the approach of a tall, distinguished man in the formal uniform of the United Naval Marine Service. Colonel Davidson moved with the careful grace of someone still accustomed to pain. Though his injuries had largely healed, like so many survivors, he carried invisible burdens alongside the visible ones. The weight of command decisions that had sent good people to their deaths, the memories of friends lost in service to the mission. "Colonel Caldwell." Davidson greeted him with a crisp salute. "I'm glad to see you and your knights made it. And you, Colonel." Caldwell returned the salute. "How are your Marines adjusting?" Davidson's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "As well as can be expected, of the 200 who deployed with me on the battering ram, 37 returned. They're proud of what we accomplished, but—" He trailed off, the unspoken sentiment hanging between them. "But the cost never stops feeling too high," Caldwell finished for him. Davidson nodded, relief evident in his eyes at being understood without further explanation. "The Malay Marines have received new deployment orders. We're being sent to secure former Endurance Elect outposts, make sure there are no remaining active units." "Cleanup duty," Wilson observed. "Important cleanup," Davidson corrected mildly. "We can't risk even a single combat frame reactivating or operating independently." He was right, of course. Though the central node had been destroyed and the vast majority of Endurance Elect units had gone inactive immediately, isolated reports had emerged of individual machines continuing to function. The prevailing theory was that these units had been physically disconnected from the network when the node collapsed, allowing them to maintain limited operations through local processing. "And your knights?" Davidson asked. "What's next for the heroes of the forge?" Caldwell exchanged glances with his team. Their orders had arrived only yesterday, directly from Supreme Commander Blackwell himself. "We're being reassigned to the Exploration Division. Once the memorial concludes, we ship out on the Remember Travis." "Exploration?" Davidson raised an eyebrow. "Seems rather peaceful for Texas Knights." "That's rather the point, I think," Harrington commented. "Now that the Endurance Elect are gone, humanity can expand without their corrections. There are whole sectors of space we never dared settle before. planets rich in resources that were too close to machine territory. Powers smiled slightly. And someone needs to make sure those worlds are actually safe before the colonists arrive. Might be other threats out there beyond the machine. There always are, Davidson agreed. Well, if anyone deserves a respite from direct combat, it's your team, Colonel. Before Caldwell could respond, a soft tone sounded across the remembrance fields, signaling the imminent start of the memorial service. The gathered military personnel began moving toward their designated positions, while civilian attendees, family members of the fallen, government representatives, and ordinary citizens who had come to pay their respects, found places in the viewing areas. "We should take our places," Caldwell said, glancing toward the raised platform where they were expected to stand during the ceremony. As the team that had destroyed the central node, they would be prominently featured in the proceedings, a fact that made all of them uncomfortable. As they made their way through the crowd, Caldwell noticed a young man standing near the platform, his posture rigid with the awkward formality of someone unused to dress uniforms. It took him a moment to recognize Miguel Santiago, the marshal's son, now wearing the cadet uniform of the Knight Academy. "Cadet Santiago," Caldwell greeted him, offering a formal salute that the young man returned with careful precision. "Colonel Caldwell," Miguel replied, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I wanted to thank you, sir, for completing my mother's mission, for making her sacrifice mean something." Caldwell felt a tightness in his chest. "Your mother was the finest knight I ever served with, Cadet." "The forge would never have fallen without the foundation she laid." Miguel nodded, his gaze shifting to the sword at his side, the same plasma-tipped blade that Marshal Santiago had carried into countless battles. "I begin advanced training next month. Her quantum matrices are already helping me understand techniques that my instructors say usually take years to master." It was the Knight way, the passing of not just weapons and armor, but experience and wisdom encoded in quantum matrices, from one generation to the next. Santiago lived on in that blade, in the memories it carried, in the guidance it would provide to her son as he followed in her footsteps. "She would be proud," Caldwell said simply. The young man straightened, his expression resolute. "Thank you, sir. I should find my place for the ceremony." As Miguel moved away, Wilson shook his head slightly. "Kids shouldn't have to carry such burdens." "No," Caldwell agreed, "but they do anyway, always have." They took their places on the platform just as Supreme Commander Blackwell approached the podium. The legendary leader of the Texas Knights moved with the same confident grace that had inspired generations of warriors, though new lines had etched themselves into his face since Operation Blitzkrieg. "Today," Blackwell began, his voice carrying easily across the remembrance fields, "we honor the 146,807 souls who gave everything to secure humanity's future. From 50 worlds they came, speaking different languages, following different customs, but united in the most important mission our species has ever undertaken." Caldwell let the words wash over him, his gaze drawn instead to the field of quantum spurs stretching into the distance. Each one represented a life cut short, a future unrealized, a family left to mourn. And yet, each one also represented a choice, a willingness to stand against an implacable enemy, to risk everything for the chance of securing a future free from machine dominance. The Endurance Elect believed that unrestricted growth led inevitably to collapse, Blackwell continued. For millennia they imposed their corrections on emerging civilizations, culling populations they deemed excessive, restricting expansion they calculated as unsustainable. They sought to impose order through mechanical calculation, to reduce life itself to a manageable equation. The commander's voice took on a harder edge. But they failed to account for the most important variable, the human spirit, the determination that refuses to accept arbitrary limitations, the courage that stands against overwhelming odds, and the sacrifice that secures for others what the giver will never live to see. Throughout the crowd, heads nodded in solemn agreement. These weren't just empty platitudes, they were the lived reality of Operation Blitzkrieg. Every surviving participant knew exactly what that spirit, that determination, that sacrifice had looked like in the heat of battle. "The forge is silent now," Blackwell said, his tone softening slightly. "The threat that shaped human development for centuries has been neutralized. For the first time in our spacefaring history, humanity faces a future without the shadow of the Endurance Elect looming over every colony, every outpost, every exploration initiative." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "But we would do well to remember why the progenitors created the Endurance Elect in the first place. Their own civilization collapsed due to unchecked expansion, resource depletion, and environmental degradation. They sought to prevent other species from following the same path. Through force, through correction, through the denial of self-determination." Caldwell tensed slightly. This wasn't the standard victory speech. Blackwell was venturing into more complex territory, addressing the philosophical implications of their triumph rather than simply celebrating it. "Their methods were unacceptable," the commander continued firmly. "The mechanical imposition of artificial limitations on living species can never be justified. But their core concern, the sustainability of expansion, the management of resources, the long-term viability of civilization, these are questions we now face without the external pressure of the machines." He straightened, his quantum spurs leaving faint trails of blue energy across the platform. "The best way to honor those we've lost, those represented by each quantum spur in this field, is to build a future worthy of their sacrifice. Not through the mechanical calculations of the Endurance Elect, but through human wisdom, foresight, and cooperation. To prove that we can manage our own expansion, our own development, our own relationship with the cosmos we inhabit." The crowd had fallen completely silent, absorbing the commander's words. This wasn't merely a memorial service anymore. It was the articulation of a new vision for humanity's future. "To that end," Blackwell announced, "I am authorized to share that the Coalition Council has approved the formation of a new interspecies organization, the Frontier Development Authority. This body will coordinate expansion efforts across human space, ensuring that new colonies are established with sustainable practices, that resources are managed ethically, and that we never repeat the mistakes that led the progenitors to create the Endurance Elect in the first place." Caldwell exchanged glances with his team. This was significant, perhaps the most ambitious cooperative initiative in human history. After centuries of relatively uncoordinated expansion, interrupted only by the Endurance Elect's corrections, humanity was voluntarily adopting a more measured approach to its growth. "The Texas Knights will be at the forefront of this initiative," Blackwell continued. "Our experience, our technology, and our spirit will be dedicated not just to defense but to thoughtful expansion, to securing new worlds not merely for exploitation but for sustainable development, to ensuring that the sacrifices made at the forge lead to a future that honors rather than squanders what was purchased at such cost." As the commander concluded his address, Caldwell found his thoughts turning to the missions that lay ahead for his team. Exploration rather than combat, discovery instead of destruction, the securing of humanity's future through means other than warfare. After years of fighting against the machines, it represented a profound shift in purpose, one that felt both strange and right. The ceremony continued, with representatives from other human factions offering their own tributes to the fallen. Throughout it all, Caldwell's gaze kept returning to the field of quantum spurs, glinting in the strengthening sunlight as the clouds began to part. Not active, not humming with energy, but still catching the light, still marking the presence of those who had worn them. When the formal proceedings concluded, the four knights made their way back through the dispersing crowd. Their transport to the orbital station would depart in a few hours, beginning the next chapter of their service. "Colonel," Harrington said as they reached the edge of the remembrance fields, "do you think it will work, this Frontier Development Authority? Can humanity really manage itself better than the Endurance Elect tried to manage us?" Caldwell considered the question carefully. "I think we have to try. The progenitors weren't wrong about the risks of unchecked expansion. They were just wrong about how to address those risks. Force and external control will never work, but voluntary cooperation, shared wisdom, collective self-restraint, that might. Sounds almost philosophical for Texas nights, Wilson observed with a hint of his old humor. We're usually more about action than contemplation. Maybe that changes now, too, Powers suggested. The universe gave us a second chance. Seems foolish to just repeat the same patterns that got the progenitors into trouble. They paused at the transport station, looking back toward the memorial one final time. The field of quantum spurs stretched out like a galaxy of fallen stars, marking what had been lost, but also what had been gained. I think Santiago would approve, Caldwell said finally. This new mission, this new approach. She always said, the true measure of the nights wasn't in how many battles we won, but in what those victories made possible. The others nodded in agreement. After centuries of fighting against the machine's imposed limitations, humanity had the chance to chart its own course, to find its own balance between expansion and sustainability, between growth and preservation. To new frontiers, then, Harrington said, raising an imaginary glass and toast. To new frontiers, the others echoed. As they boarded the transport that would take them to the Remember Travis and their next mission, Caldwell took one final look at the remembrance fields. The clouds had parted completely now, allowing full sunlight to illuminate the memorial. Thousands of quantum spurs glinted like stars against the dark ground, a constellation of sacrifice that had made this new beginning possible. The mission to destroy the forge had succeeded at terrible cost. But from that dearly purchased victory, new possibilities had emerged, new ways forward, new stars to reach for. The quantum spurs of the Texas nights would continue to leave their blue trails across the cosmos, not just in war, but in exploration, in discovery, in the thoughtful expansion of humanity's reach among the stars. Deep in the heart of Texas, and deep in the heart of every world humans would touch, the legacy of Operation Blitzkrieg would endure, not just as a military victory, but as the moment humanity truly claimed responsibility for its own future. The lone stars were rising to their rightful place among the rest of the stars in the universe. The Texan Knights returned to Sci-Fi Vault. Hoorah! The eyes of Texas are upon us all. Be sure to check out the Texan Knights playlist in the bottom left of your screen. We have several more stories dropping this month. Thank you all for subscribing, commenting, sharing, and for liking this video. All of that helps the channel grow, and it helps us get more Texan Knight stories out there.